At my husband's promotion party, my 6-year-old son was told to sit at a different table to make room for the real children. My mother-in-law even shoved my little boy away from the table. When my husband discovered what was happening, he said one sentence right in front of everyone. His parents' faces immediately went pale. My name is Sienna. I am 32 years old and I work as a commercial real estate broker in Atlanta. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to put you in your place. The sound of shattering porcelain is something I will never forget. It cut through the smooth jazz and the clinking of crystal champagne glasses like a gunshot. We were at a private country club in Buckhead surrounded by the absolute upper crust of Atlanta society. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. My husband DeAndre, who is 35, had just been named vice president of a major financial investment fund. He is a brilliant, hard-working man who loves me fiercely, and more importantly, he loves my son Trey as his own. Trey is my biological son from a previous relationship. His father passed away before he was even born. DeAndre stepped into our lives when Trey was just a baby and legally adopted him when he turned 3. To DeAndre, Trey is his son. There is no distinction, no hesitation, and no difference in his heart. But to his mother, Vivian, Trey was nothing more than an outsider polluting her precious bloodline. I built my life from nothing. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood fighting for every scholarship, every internship, and every client until I became one of the top commercial real estate brokers in the city. I know the value of hard work, and I know exactly how to handle people who try to intimidate me. But nothing prepares you for the sight of your own child being mistreated by someone who is supposed to be family. Vivian is 60 years old and obsessed with status. She wears her social club memberships like military medals and treats her family tree like an exclusive VIP list. To her, DeAndre was the golden prince of the family, destined to marry someone from a recognized wealthy legacy family. Instead, he married me, a woman who came with what Vivian called baggage. For years, she disguised her disdain with passive-aggressive comments and backhanded compliments. But tonight, surrounded by her wealthy friends and socialite peers, she decided to make a public statement. I was standing near the grand windows overlooking the golf course, speaking with a few of DeAndre's new board members. I had spent the evening playing the perfect corporate wife, networking and smiling, ensuring DeAndre looked like the powerful executive he was. Women in designer gowns and men in tailored suits mingled under massive chandeliers. I felt a sense of immense pride watching my husband navigate the room. Then, over the low hum of expensive conversations, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sharp, unmistakable sound of my son crying. I excused myself instantly, my heels sinking into the thick carpet as I hurried toward the main dining area. The family table was set right in the center of the room, adorned with massive floral centerpieces and reserved place cards. But Trey was not in his seat next to DeAndre. I scanned the room and felt a surge of pure, unfiltered rage. Vivian had physically grabbed Trey by his small shoulders and was pushing him toward the kitchen entrance. There, tucked away in a dark corner next to the swinging doors where the waiters rushed in and out, was a tiny, wobbly folding table. It had no tablecloth, no centerpiece, just a stark, humiliating separation from the rest of the room. I watched in horror as Vivian pushed my crying 6-year-old onto a cheap plastic chair. Back at the main table, DeAndre's sister Kendra and her husband Darnell were taking their seats. Kendra is 30, a woman who has never worked a day in her life, funded entirely by her husband and my in-laws. She sat down smoothing her expensive dress and actively smirked as she watched my son being banished to the corner. She then pulled her own 2 children close, seating them right next to the guest of honor's chair. Vivian was literally clearing the table of my son to make room for Kendra's children, the ones Vivian considered her true grandchildren. I marched across the ballroom, my vision going red. I did not care about the promotion. I did not care about the wealthy guests staring at us. Nobody puts my child in a corner. As I approached, Vivian turned around, brushing her hands together as if she had just taken out the trash. She saw the fury on my face and immediately puffed out her chest, preparing for a fight she thought she would win. I grabbed Trey's hand and pulled him up from the folding chair. He was wiping tears from his cheeks, looking up at me with confusion. Vivian raised her voice deliberately, projecting it so the surrounding tables could hear every word. "This table is for the true bloodline legacy," she announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The outsider boy needs to learn his place early. He cannot sit with the real family tonight. We have important guests, Sienna. We cannot have a child of unknown genetics disrupting the aesthetic of our family legacy." Her sheer audacity paralyzed the nearby guests. Conversations flatlined. Kendra covered her mouth to hide a laugh, and Darnell leaned back in his chair, thoroughly enjoying the show. I opened my mouth, ready to completely dismantle Vivian right there on the polished hardwood floor. I was fully prepared to burn my own reputation to the ground to defend my son. But before a single syllable left my lips, a large hand clamped down firmly on my shoulder. It was DeAndre. He had crossed the room in seconds, his face completely devoid of expression. It was a cold, terrifying calm that I had never seen before. DeAndre did not pull me aside. He did not whisper in my ear to calm down and cause no scene. He did not try to preserve the peace for the sake of his career. Instead, he walked past me, stepped right up to the extravagant family table, picked up a full crystal champagne flute, and hurled it directly onto the marble floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces with a violent crash. Several women shrieked. Roland, my father-in-law, jumped out of his seat in shock. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The jazz band stopped playing. Every single eye in the Buckhead Country Club was fixed entirely on DeAndre. He ignored the gasps. He ignored his boss standing just a few feet away. He locked his eyes dead onto his mother. Vivian's smug expression instantly dissolved into pale, trembling panic. She had expected DeAndre to mediate. She had expected him to keep the peace. She had miscalculated completely. DeAndre's voice was not a shout. It was a deep, resonant command that carried to every corner of the room. "If my son is not fit to sit at this table," he stated, emphasizing the word son with absolute authority, "then neither am I." The silence in the room deepened. Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but DeAndre cut her off, stepping closer to the table. He looked down at Kendra and Darnell, who had both frozen in their seats, and then back to his parents. And from this second on, he continued, his voice sharp as a blade. "My money has absolutely nothing to do with this so-called legacy. You are cut off. All of you." Roland gasped, clutching the edge of the table. Vivian staggered backward, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. DeAndre turned away from them without waiting for a response. He walked over to me, picked Trey up in his arms, and kissed my forehead. "We are leaving," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "We do not dine with trash." He held his free hand out to me. I took it, holding my head high as we walked toward the grand exit. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. No one dared to say a word. As we reached the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom, Vivian finally found her voice. Her composure shattered completely, and she screamed across the silent room. "You are throwing your family away for a worthless woman," she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation and rage. "You cut off our funding because of that lower-class girl. I will ruin her. Do you hear me? I will destroy her real estate career. I will make sure she never sells another building in this city again." DeAndre did not even turn around. He pushed the doors open and we walked out into the cool evening air, leaving his screaming mother and stunned family behind. The valet brought our car in silence. As we drove away from the country club, Trey fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the crying. I looked over at DeAndre. His jaw was clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had just sacrificed his perfect promotion party and openly declared war on his own blood to protect us. "They are going to come after us," I said quietly, watching the city lights blur past the window. "I know Vivian. She is not going to just take that public humiliation. She is going to try to destroy everything I have built." DeAndre kept his eyes on the road. "Let them try," he replied, his voice dangerously calm. "They have no idea who they are messing with." But as we pulled into our driveway, neither of us realized just how far Vivian and Kendra were willing to go. The war had just begun, and by tomorrow morning my entire professional life would be under attack. We walked into our home ready to face the storm that was rapidly approaching. Monday morning hit with the force of a freight train. I had barely stepped out of the elevator into the sleek modern lobby of my commercial real estate firm when the front desk receptionist shot me a panicked look. She did not even say good morning. She just pointed frantically toward the glass-walled corner office of my managing broker, David. I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. Through the glass, I could see David pacing heavily behind his massive desk, his mobile phone pressed tightly to his ear while his office phone flashed with multiple holding lines. When he saw me approach, he slammed the receiver down and waved me inside quickly. I closed the heavy door behind me, immediately sensing the suffocating tension filling the room. "Take a seat right now, Sienna," David said, his voice completely drained of its usual morning enthusiasm. "We have a massive problem on our hands." He turned his wide computer monitor around to face me. "My direct inbox has been exploding since 6 o'clock this morning. We have received over 40 emails plus a dozen angry voicemails on the firm's main executive line. They are all from highly prominent members of the Atlanta Business Community Country Club, presidents, prestigious charity board directors, and extremely wealthy socialites." I kept my posture rigid, refusing to show even an ounce of intimidation. "Let me guess. They are expressing deep concern about my professional integrity and my moral character." David sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if fighting off a sudden migraine. "They are explicitly calling you a fraud, Sienna. The emails claim you are a dangerous gold digger who trapped a wealthy financial executive. They are stating as fact that you use your commercial real estate license to run unethical shell companies. They are telling our clients that you are systematically draining your husband's accounts to fund illegal property flips. One email even claimed you forged signatures on closing documents. Sienna, these are serious career-ending allegations from people with serious money and massive influence. Our firm relies entirely on this elite network. If the State Real Estate Commission gets wind of this coordinated attack, they could suspend your license immediately pending a lengthy investigation." Vivian and Kendra had not wasted a single second. Instead of crying over the shattered champagne glass at the country club, they had spent their entire Sunday weaponizing their high society connections. They were using their elite influence to orchestrate a surgical strike on my career, hiding behind anonymous addresses and concerned citizen personas to destroy the professional reputation I had spent a decade bleeding for. They expected me to panic. They expected me to break down in tears and resign in disgrace to save the firm from a devastating public relations nightmare. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or offer frantic, desperate explanations. I simply reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out my master closing portfolio, and slapped the thick binder directly onto David's mahogany desk. The loud, authoritative thud echoed in the quiet office. "Open it," I commanded, my voice ice cold. David blinked clearly, taken aback by my complete lack of panic. He cautiously opened the heavy binder. Inside were the verified financial records of every commercial property I had closed in the last 3 years. "Look at the actual numbers, David," I said, leaning directly over his desk to hold his gaze. "I brought in $12 million in clean commission revenue for this firm last year alone. I personally secured the downtown high-rise lease that nobody else in the city could touch. I brought in the international shipping client that single-handedly saved our entire fourth quarter. I built my wealth with my own 2 hands. DeAndre is a vice president of finance, yes. But I matched his annual salary 2 years ago. I am not draining his accounts because I do not need a single dime of his money. I have my own empire." David stared at the spreadsheets, looking at the undeniable proof of my financial dominance in the Atlanta market. Now I continued tapping my manicured finger against his glowing computer screen. "I want you to call our IT department immediately. I want them to run a full aggressive trace on the IP addresses of every single anonymous email you received this morning. They are using dummy accounts, but these people are arrogant, not tech-savvy. I will bet my real estate license and my entire commission for the upcoming year that those IP addresses trace straight back to a specific gated estate in Buckhead. My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law are running a vicious smear campaign today because my husband publicly cut off their access to his money last night. David looked up from the portfolio. His business instincts immediately took over, overriding his initial panic. He understood exactly what was happening in front of him. A petty, toxic family feud was attempting to disrupt his top-earning agent and threaten his firm's bottom line. He picked up his phone and dialed the IT department without a second thought. "Track the origins of the morning spam wave," he ordered sharply. "Find the exact residential nodes and give me the geographical locations." 10 minutes later, the IT director called back and confirmed my exact suspicion. 30 of the emails had been sent from a single IP address registered to Vivian's home network. The rest were easily traced to Kendra's luxury condominium complex. David leaned back in his leather chair, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. They really thought they could manipulate a major commercial brokerage firm with cheap country club gossip and fake email accounts. "They thought I would break under the pressure," I replied calmly, picking up my portfolio and placing it back into my briefcase. "But I do not break. Are we perfectly clear on my standing with this firm, David?" He smiled a sharp, calculating corporate grin. "Crystal clear, Sienna. I will handle the board and shut down these complaints. You go close your deals." I walked out of that glass office feeling an absolute rush of victory. I had dismantled Vivian's first coordinated assault with nothing but raw data and cold logic. I spent the rest of the day dominating my client meetings, fully energized by the thrill of the win. When I pulled my car into our driveway that evening, I was ready to pour a glass of wine and tell DeAndre exactly how I had crushed his mother's pathetic corporate sabotage. I unlocked the front door and walked into the kitchen, a confident, triumphant smile on my face. The smile vanished instantly. DeAndre was sitting at the massive granite kitchen island. He was not wearing his usual relaxed evening clothes. He was still in his full tailored work suit. His tie loosened, his posture rigidly stiff. Spread across the island was a massive, intimidating stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. He was staring at them with a look of absolute, unadulterated fury. "DeAndre," I said, dropping my keys on the counter, a knot forming in my throat. "What is wrong? What are those documents?" He looked up and his eyes were completely hollow, devoid of their usual warmth. "They did not just attack your job, Sienna. They went nuclear today." I stepped closer, my heart beginning to hammer violently against my ribs. I looked down at the documents. The bold legal headers screamed emergency court injunction. "My parents just served me at my corporate office," DeAndre explained, his voice dangerously low and trembling with rage. "They hired a team of aggressive wealth management lawyers. They found an obscure, archaic loophole in the original family trust established by my grandfather. Because the trust was technically designed to protect the bloodline assets from outside interference, they filed an emergency motion claiming I am currently suffering from severe psychological manipulation." Psychological manipulation. I repeated, reading the horrifying words on the legal filing. "They are officially claiming I brainwashed you." "Yes," DeAndre said, his hands clenching into tight fists on the granite counter. "They told a federal judge that you isolated me from the family and manipulated me into cutting off their financial support. They used that ridiculous fabricated claim to trigger an absolute freeze protocol. All of my primary investment accounts, my liquid assets, my entire personal portfolio tied to the trust. It is all completely frozen by court order until a full psychiatric and legal evaluation is completed. They locked me out of my own money." I felt the air leave my lungs. Vivian was not just throwing a tantrum. She was trying to legally cripple us and strip us of our resources. But as I flipped to the second page of the injunction, I saw something that made the entire room spin. The financial freeze was not the worst part of their attack. It was the second petition attached to the filing. DeAndre watched my face as my eyes scanned the words. His voice broke as he spoke. "They did not stop at the money, Sienna." I read the paragraph, my vision blurring with tears of pure, blinding terror. Vivian and her husband Roland had formally petitioned the family court to review and revoke DeAndre's legal adoption of Trey. They argued that because DeAndre was allegedly under extreme psychological duress when he signed the adoption papers 3 years ago, the adoption was inherently fraudulent. They were asking a judge to strip DeAndre of his parental rights to my son, legally severing Trey from our family unit to ensure he could never inherit a single dime of the precious family wealth. They were trying to take my husband's son away on paper. They were trying to erase Trey's father entirely just to protect their arrogant legacy. DeAndre ripped the injunction papers from the granite counter and hurled them across our kitchen. The heavy pages scattered over the hardwood floor like dead leaves. I had never seen my husband lose his composure. In the corporate boardroom, DeAndre was a stoic, calculating financial predator. He routinely dismantled multi-million-dollar hedge funds without breaking a sweat or raising his voice. But seeing a court petition specifically designed to legally sever him from the boy he had raised, the boy who called him dad every single day, completely broke his rigid professional facade. He began pacing the length of our kitchen, his chest heaving with raw, unfiltered fury. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over his contacts list. "I am calling my corporate legal team right now," he growled, his voice vibrating with absolute menace. "I am going to unleash every single shark in my firm's legal department. We will file countersuits for defamation, harassment, and severe emotional distress. I will bury my parents in so much aggressive litigation, they will have to sell their precious country club memberships just to afford their legal defense. I am going to scorch the earth, Sienna. Nobody threatens to take my son. Nobody." His anger was completely justified. The threat of losing Trey's legal status pushed this conflict far beyond casual social snobbery or petty family drama. This was no longer about who sat at which table at a promotional dinner. This was a direct, calculated attack on the fundamental existence of our family. This was a brutal fight for our survival. But as I watched my husband prepare to dive into an emotional, messy legal war, my own real estate instincts kicked in. I deal with hostile takeovers and aggressive land disputes for a living. I know that the moment you let emotion dictate your strategy, you lose the upper hand. You start making reckless mistakes, and reckless mistakes cost you the war. I walked across the kitchen, stepping over the scattered legal documents, and placed both of my hands firmly on DeAndre's chest. I looked up into his furious eyes and forced him to stop pacing. I needed him grounded. I needed him cold. "Do not call the corporate lawyers yet," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady and impossibly calm. "Do not let them see you panic. That is exactly what Vivian and your father want. They want you to react emotionally. They want you to launch a massive, noisy legal counterattack because it plays right into their narrative. If you lose your temper and unleash your lawyers tonight, you validate their ridiculous claim that you are acting erratically. You give that federal judge a reason to believe their fabricated story about psychological manipulation. We cannot fight them with anger, DeAndre. We have to fight them with absolute silence." He let out a shaky breath, closing his eyes as he rested his forehead against mine. "They are trying to take my boy, Sienna. They are trying to erase me from his life on paper. They will never touch our son, I promised, my voice hardening into steel. But we are not going to win this by playing their game. We are going to play mine." I stepped back and picked up the adoption revocation petition from the floor. I smoothed out the crumpled page, staring at Vivian and Roland's signatures at the bottom. The sheer arrogance of their legal maneuver disgusted me, but it also revealed a critical weakness. They were acting out of desperation, not strength. People who possess genuine power do not need to rely on obscure, archaic trust loopholes. They were hiding something massive, and they were using this lawsuit as a smokescreen to distract us. I looked at DeAndre and laid out our battle plan. "They attacked my real estate license this morning," I said, tapping the document. "So let me dismantle their foundation. You handle the trust lawyers. You focus entirely on protecting your assets and maintaining your spotless corporate image. Keep your head down, do your job, and let your legal team slowly and methodically squash this injunction. I am going to find out what they are hiding." DeAndre looked at me, his analytical mind catching up with my logic. "What do you mean hiding?" "I mean that your parents do not have the liquid capital to sustain a prolonged federal court battle." I explained my commercial broker instincts working at lightning speed. "Your father's investment firm has not closed a major deal in months. Your mother's country club galas are entirely funded by credit lines. They needed your money, DeAndre, when you cut them off at the restaurant. You did not just embarrass them, you severed their lifeline. This injunction is a desperate cash grab. I am going to dig into their property records, their mortgages, and their corporate shell companies. I will find their weak point. Our strategy was officially set in stone. We would divide and conquer. But to execute this properly, we needed absolute impenetrable discipline. I established the ground rules right then and there. We are initiating strict no contact, I told him. We do not argue with Vivian. We do not answer your father's calls. We do not engage with Kendra's high society gossip. From this exact second forward, we communicate with your family only through our attorneys. No exceptions. As if on cue, DeAndre's phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a preview of a text message from Vivian. It was a frantic, rambling paragraph. She was demanding that DeAndre come to the Buckhead estate immediately to apologize for his disrespectful outburst at the restaurant. She claimed her blood pressure was dangerously high and accused me of forcing him to abandon his sick mother. It was a textbook gaslighting attempt perfectly crafted to induce guilt and force him back into compliance. DeAndre stared at the glowing screen, a muscle feathered in his jaw. In the past, he would have called her back to de-escalate the situation. He would have tried to reason with her, to explain our side, to seek a peaceful resolution. But tonight was different. He reached out, picked up the phone, and without a single word of hesitation, he blocked his mother's number. He then blocked his father, his sister Kendra, and his brother-in-law Darnell. I did the same on my phone. The digital silence in our kitchen was deafening, but it felt incredibly liberating. The boundary was set. The fortress walls were drawn up. We were no longer playing defense against their toxic demands. We were preparing for total war. I thought the absolute worst of their attacks had passed with the injunction. I assumed that taking away their direct line of communication would force them to retreat and regroup. I severely underestimated the viciousness of my sister-in-law. Kendra, having lost her ability to text or call us, decided to escalate things further. She realized that attacking my career and DeAndre's finances was not yielding the immediate emotional breakdown they desperately wanted. So she shifted her target. She went after the most vulnerable part of our lives. She went after Trey. The next morning, the Atlanta air was crisp and unseasonably cool. I dressed in a sharp professional tailored suit, preparing to drop Trey off at his exclusive private elementary school before heading to my brokerage firm. The school was a prestigious, highly secure academy catering to the children of politicians, athletes, and top-tier executives. It was an environment that thrived on reputation appearances and intense parental networking. Kendra knew this perfectly well. Her own 2 children attended the same academy, placing her directly inside the inner circle of the school's powerful parent-teacher association. I parked my car in the designated drop-off zone and walked Trey to the main courtyard gates. I kissed his forehead, adjusted his backpack, and watched him run happily toward his friends. I turned around to head back to my car, feeling a brief moment of normalcy. But as I walked past the beautifully manicured parent gathering area near the administration office, I heard a voice that made my stomach churn. It was Kendra. She was standing in the center of a tight circle of prominent PTA mothers, holding an expensive latte and wearing a perfectly curated designer athletic outfit. She was leaning in close, speaking in a loud, deliberate whisper designed to carry across the courtyard. "It is just so tragic for my brother," Kendra was saying, her tone dripping with fake performative sympathy. "DeAndre has such a good heart, but he was completely tricked into adopting that boy. We are all terrified for our own children's safety, honestly." I froze behind a large oak tree, completely hidden from their view, but close enough to hear every single venomous word. The PTA president, a wealthy woman named Claire, gasped softly. "Safety. What do you mean, Kendra? Is Trey acting out in class?" Kendra sighed heavily, placing a hand over her chest, as if the burden of her secret was simply too much to bear. "Well, we try to keep family matters private, but you all need to know for the sake of your kids." Trey's biological father was deeply troubled. He had a criminal background. And you know how these things work. The apple does not fall far from the tree. Trey has violent, unstable genetic tendencies from his biological father. We have seen him exhibit extreme aggression at family gatherings. He really should not be around normal, well-adjusted children. It is a massive liability for the school. My blood turned to absolute ice. Kendra was using her status as a prominent socialite to poison the minds of the most influential parents in the school. She was actively trying to get my 6-year-old son ostracized, isolated, and potentially expelled by fabricating a horrific racist narrative about his genetics. She was labeling a sweet, innocent little boy as a violent threat simply to hurt me. I stepped out from behind the tree. I did not rush toward them. I did not yell or create a scene that would validate her ridiculous claims of instability. I walked slowly and purposefully, directly into the center of their circle, my footsteps silent on the pristine pavement, arriving just in time to catch the horrified expressions on the faces of the PTA mothers as they saw me standing right behind Kendra. I stared at my sister-in-law, my posture perfectly straight, my face completely composed. The smear campaign had finally reached its absolute limit. It was time to return fire, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. Kendra turned around slowly. The smug satisfaction on her face instantly melted into a mask of sheer unadulterated panic. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping her $6 organic matcha latte onto her pristine white tennis shoes. The tight circle of elite Parent-Teacher Association mothers, including the highly influential President Claire, parted like the Red Sea. They created a wide, awkward berth between me and my terrified sister-in-law. For a fraction of a second, Kendra looked like a cornered animal, desperate to run. But she was trapped by her own desperate need to maintain her fragile social standing in front of Atlanta's wealthiest housewives. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She lied. She forced her trembling lips into a fake, pitiful smile and clasped her manicured hands together in a theatrical display of faux concern. Sienna, Kendra stammered, her voice shaking noticeably, despite her best efforts to sound compassionate and composed. I did not see you there. We were just expressing our deepest sympathies to one another. I was just telling the ladies how incredibly hard things must be for you right now, dealing with DeAndre's sudden family stress, and trying to manage a young child with such complex, inherited behavioral issues. We are all just praying for your little family during this very dark time. I did not yell, I did not raise my hand, and I did not step into her personal space. I just stood there letting her poisonous words hang in the crisp morning air, allowing the sheer toxicity of her lie to settle over the impeccably landscaped school courtyard. I glanced over at Claire. Claire was standing next to her massive custom-ordered luxury sport utility vehicle, which was currently idling by the curb. The heavy doors were wide open because Claire had been actively unloading expensive floral decorations for an upcoming Academy charity auction. I knew Claire very well. I had personally helped her organize the school's commercial real estate fundraiser last month. I also knew that Claire always left her vehicle's premium entertainment system in open pairing mode during these outdoor volunteer events, so parent organizers could easily connect their devices and play music while they worked. I reached into the pocket of my tailored emerald blazer and pulled out my smartphone. My screen illuminated. I opened my settings menu and tapped the connection icon. The luxury vehicle's open network popped up instantly on my screen. I connected. The subtle chime from the vehicle's massive surround sound speakers confirmed that my phone was successfully paired. The wealthy mothers looked at me in total confusion. Kendra's fake, pitiful smile began to waver, replaced rapidly by a look of profound, creeping dread. "You have always been so incredibly concerned about my family, Kendra," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, terrifying authority that demanded absolute silence. "But it seems you have been projecting your own family's disastrous instability onto my innocent 6-year-old son. Since you enjoy sharing private family matters with the prestigious school community, I think it is only fair that we share the full, unedited picture of what actually goes on behind closed doors in the elite Buckhead estates you love to brag about." I opened my secure file manager application and selected an audio file I had saved safely in my encrypted cloud drive. It was a clear, high-definition dash camera recording from inside my own car, captured exactly 3 weeks prior. Kendra had cornered me in the private driveway of my home, desperate for a confidential conversation away from the listening ears of her husband and her domineering mother. As a top-tier commercial broker, I document everything. I tapped the play button on my phone screen and turned the media volume all the way to maximum. The luxury vehicle's massive high-fidelity speakers roared to life, broadcasting the audio across the entire school courtyard with crystal-clear precision. Everyone present could suddenly hear the undeniable, desperate sound of Kendra sobbing uncontrollably. "Sienna, please, you have to help me." The recorded voice of Kendra wailed through the heavy speakers, her pathetic cries echoing off the brick walls of the academy. "You have to co-sign this luxury loan for me. Just this one time. I need $50,000 by Friday, or the high-end boutique is going to publicly cancel my custom Hermes bag order. You do not understand the absolute humiliation I will face. My entire social circle will know I cannot afford it." The mothers in the courtyard gasped collectively. Claire's eyes widened in sheer shock, her hand flying to her chest. Kendra let out a strangled, horrified cry and lunged forward to grab my phone, but I effortlessly stepped aside, keeping the glowing screen far out of her desperate reach. The audio continued to play loudly and mercilessly for all to hear. "Darnell's credit cards are completely maxed out." The recorded? Kendra sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic, undeniable desperation. "Every single one of his platinum accounts is locked by the banks. We are drowning in secret debt, Sienna. Darnell's corporate investments are failing rapidly, and my parents refuse to give us another dime because they are tapped out too. If the other wealthy mothers at the academy find out we are practically broke, I will be socially ruined. Please, Sienna, you have so much commission money from your massive real estate deals. Just front me the cash and do not tell DeAndre." Then came my recorded voice, calm, measured, and entirely dismissive. "I am not financing your fake lifestyle, Kendra. Tell your husband to get a real job." I hit pause on my phone. The sudden silence in the courtyard was absolutely deafening. The crisp morning breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak trees, but not a single woman dared to speak or even breathe too loudly. The grand illusion of Kendra's superior, old money wealth had just been absolutely obliterated in front of the exact people she had spent her entire adult life trying to impress and manipulate. I looked at the tight circle of elite mothers. These were women who worshipped extreme financial status and despised nothing more than a desperate social climber masquerading as a member of the elite class. The sheer, unfiltered disgust on their heavily made-up faces was palpable. They physically stepped away from Kendra, pulling their designer handbags closer to their bodies as if financial ruin were a highly contagious disease. Claire, the powerful Parent Association president, looked at Kendra with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. Kendra's face turned a violent, blotchy shade of crimson. The flawless, arrogant socialite facade had completely melted away in a matter of seconds, leaving behind a terrified, humiliated fraud who had just been stripped of her only currency. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some kind of excuse or explanation, but only a pathetic, broken stammer came out. She had absolutely no defense. She had no more lies left to spin. She grabbed her designer purse, spun on her expensive heels, and sprinted toward her parked car. She practically threw herself into the driver's seat, slammed the heavy door, and sped out of the academy parking lot, the tires of her heavily leased vehicle screeching loudly against the pristine asphalt. I calmly disconnected my phone from the vehicle's audio system and slid the device back into the pocket of my blazer. I turned my attention back to the stunned, silent group of mothers. I adjusted the cuffs of my suit, stood incredibly tall, and looked Claire directly in the eyes. "My son Trey is a brilliant, highly intelligent, and perfectly well-adjusted child," I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable absolute power. "He is being raised in a stable home, built on actual verified wealth, generated by hard work, and surrounded by real unconditional love. If any person at this prestigious academy ever questions his character, his genetics, or his absolute right to be here again, you will not be dealing with simple neighborhood gossip. You will be dealing directly with my corporate legal team. Are we entirely clear?" Claire swallowed hard and nodded quickly, her posture instantly respectful and entirely subservient. Crystal clear sienna. Trey is an absolute joy to have at this school. We adore him and support him completely. The other wealthy mothers murmured their rapid, nervous agreement, completely terrified of crossing a woman who had just effortlessly dismantled a local socialite before 9 in the morning. I had secured my son's social and academic standing at the academy without raising my voice or breaking a single drop of sweat. I offered them a polite, razor-sharp smile, turned around, and walked confidently back to my car. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the intense adrenaline of the public confrontation began to slowly fade. It was replaced instantly by the cold, calculating mindset of a top-tier commercial real estate broker. My mind raced repeatedly, playing back the audio recording I had just broadcasted to the entire courtyard. Kendra had explicitly stated that Darnell's credit cards were entirely maxed out by the banks. She had tearfully confessed that they were drowning in secret, overwhelming debt. She had revealed that Darnell's investments were failing miserably and that Vivian and Roland refused to lend them money because the parents were financially tapped out too. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tightly as the heavy pieces of the puzzle began to violently snap together in my mind. If Darnell and Kendra were completely broke and Vivian and Roland were financially tapped out, then the emergency court injunction they filed yesterday made terrifying perfect sense. They did not freeze DeAndre's multi-million-dollar trust accounts merely out of spite or petty anger over a ruined promotion dinner. They froze his massive assets because they were starving for immediate liquid capital. My professional real estate instincts flared to brilliant life, burning straight through the emotional fog of the ongoing family betrayal. I realized with absolute chilling certainty that the prestigious, untouchable legacy of my husband's family was nothing but a massive, hollow financial illusion. They were not old money elites protecting their vast empire from an outsider. They were desperate, drowning frauds scrambling wildly to cover up a catastrophic financial collapse. I pulled my car out of the academy gates and merged onto the bustling Atlanta highway, my destination clearly and firmly set. I was not going to my corporate office to close standard property deals today. I was going to use my top-tier commercial real estate access to launch a full-scale, relentless forensic investigation into Roland's investment firm and Vivian's sprawling Buckhead estate. I was going to follow the hidden paper trail of their secret debt, uncover the exact nature of their impending financial ruin, and find the lethal, undeniable weak point that would allow me to crush their fake empire once and for all. I drove straight past my firm's main corporate office and headed directly to a private, secure suite I maintained in a downtown high-rise. I needed absolute silence and unrestricted access to the most powerful financial databases in the state of Georgia. I did not want my managing broker looking over my shoulder, and I certainly did not want any interruptions. I walked into the soundproof room, locked the heavy deadbolt behind me, and fired up my custom multi-monitor workstation. I poured myself a massive cup of black coffee, sat down in my leather ergonomic chair, and cracked my knuckles. The emotional exhaustion of the morning completely vanished, replaced entirely by the sharp, ruthless focus of a corporate predator. I was no longer a hurt daughter-in-law dealing with toxic family drama. I was a top-tier commercial real estate broker executing a hostile takeover investigation. Vivian and Roland were no longer family. They were simply Target A and Target B. I opened my secure encrypted virtual private network and logged directly into the proprietary real estate databases that cost my firm tens of thousands of dollars a month to maintain. I bypassed the standard public search engines and went straight for the deep restricted access portals used by elite forensic accountants and high-level property developers. I typed the official name of Roland's financial investment company into the global search bar and hit enter. The screen immediately populated with decades of corporate filings, property deeds, and tax records. I started pulling everything. I downloaded annual financial reports, commercial lease agreements, and state tax assessments. I drank my coffee and began systematically tearing through Roland's business history line by grueling line. For the first 2 hours, the corporate structure looked legitimate on the surface. Roland had set up a complex, dizzying web of limited liability companies clearly designed to confuse anyone looking from the outside. But I build commercial empires for a living. I know exactly how to dismantle a maze of shell companies. I started tracing the routing numbers, cross-referencing the registered agents, and following the actual flow of capital between Roland's various holding firms. It did not take long for the shiny, prestigious facade to completely shatter. By noon, I had uncovered a staggering, undeniable truth. Roland's investment firm was practically a ghost ship. They had not closed a single legitimate, profitable commercial deal in nearly a decade. The entire company was a massive, bleeding financial wound. I stared at the glowing monitors in absolute disgust. Roland had been moving the exact same depreciating assets back and forth between his own shell companies just to generate fake paper revenue and maintain the illusion of active cash flow. He was taking out massive high-interest loans against failing commercial properties to pay off older defaulting loans. It was a classic desperate corporate shell game, and it was entirely unsustainable. But the commercial properties were only a fraction of their financial disaster. I needed to look at their personal assets. I needed to look at the crown jewel of Vivian's arrogant aristocratic identity. I opened a new search window and accessed the Deep County Tax Assessor database for the elite Buckhead district. I typed in the exact address of Vivian and Roland's sprawling, custom-built mansion. This was the house where Vivian hosted her exclusive charity galas. This was the house with the imported Italian marble floors and the perfectly manicured rose gardens where she looked down her nose at everyone she deemed socially inferior. This was the fortress of her precious, pure bloodline legacy. I pulled the master deed and the complete mortgage history for the property. I read the numbers on the screen, and a cold, predatory smile spread slowly across my face. Vivian's magnificent throne was built entirely on quicksand. The Buckhead mansion was leveraged to the absolute hilt. Over the past 7 years, Roland had taken out 3 separate, massive equity lines of credit against the home just to keep his failing business afloat and to fund Vivian's wildly extravagant country club lifestyle. They had bled every single ounce of equity out of the property, but that was not the discovery that made my heart race. I scrolled down to the most recent financial filings attached to the property deed. Traditional banks had clearly stopped lending to Roland years ago because his credit and corporate collateral were completely worthless. To keep the lights on and the champagne flowing at their parties, Roland had been forced to turn to the shadow market. He had taken out a colossal high-risk mortgage through a ruthless, predatory private equity lending firm based out of New York. The terms of this specific private equity loan were absolutely brutal. It was structured with a predatory balloon payment, meaning Roland had been paying only the bare minimum interest for 5 years, and now, the entire multi-million-dollar principal balance was due in one massive lump sum payment. I quickly cross-referenced the dates on the loan agreement with the current county default registry. The puzzle pieces violently slammed into place. Roland was exactly 3 months behind on that massive balloon payment. The private equity lender had already issued a formal notice of default. The paperwork had been filed quietly, kept out of the mainstream local press to avoid panicking their remaining minor investors. But the legal reality was irrefutable. Vivian and Roland's prized Buckhead mansion was facing imminent catastrophic foreclosure. The bank was literally weeks away from changing the locks and throwing Vivian's designer luggage out onto the pristine Atlanta curb. I leaned back in my leather chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating the dark, silent office. I let out a slow, steady breath as the true, horrifying brilliance of their recent attacks finally made perfect sense. The emergency court injunction they had filed against DeAndre yesterday was not just a petty, vindictive act of revenge for the shattered champagne glass at the promotion dinner. It was a calculated, desperate legal heist. Vivian and Roland were suffocating under the weight of their secret debt. They were staring down the barrel of total social and financial ruin. When DeAndre stood in that country club and publicly announced that he was cutting them off, he inadvertently severed their only hope of surviving the private equity firm's foreclosure deadline. They panicked. They hired aggressive wealth management lawyers and used the archaic family trust loophole to freeze DeAndre's primary investment accounts. They claimed psychological manipulation because it was the only legal maneuver that would allow them to temporarily bypass DeAndre's direct authorization. Their ultimate goal was to illegally siphon his vast liquid trust funds, drain his hard-earned money, and use it to pay off the massive balloon payment on their Buckhead mansion before the private equity lender seized the property. They were entirely willing to frame me as a gold-digging manipulator. They were absolutely prepared to destroy my professional real estate career. They were even willing to rip my 6-year-old son out of his legally adopted father's arms, traumatizing a child for life, all just to ensure that DeAndre's wealth remained trapped inside the family trust where they could secretly steal it. They were trying to cannibalize their own son's financial future to save their fake, arrogant social standing. The sheer, breathtaking malice of their plan sent a surge of pure, icy adrenaline straight through my veins. They thought they were the apex predators in this family. They thought they could execute a complex financial ambush and leave me crying in the dirt. But they had made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They had targeted the family of a woman who dismantles real estate empires for sport. I did not feel fear. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the absolute unwavering thrill of an incoming victory. I quickly highlighted all the property deeds, the shell company routing numbers, the notice of default, and the private equity loan agreements. I downloaded every single file, encrypting them directly onto a secure flash drive. I printed hard copies of the most damning documents, organizing them into a thick, immaculate dossier. I gathered my things, locked my secure suite, and walked out to my car. I drove straight back to my house. I needed to show DeAndre exactly what his parents were hiding. I needed to show my husband that his family was not just toxic, but actively orchestrating a massive illegal financial fraud. And once he saw the undeniable proof, I knew exactly what we were going to do next. We were going to buy his parents' debt, and we were going to become their absolute worst nightmare. I walked through the heavy front doors of our home, my heels echoing in the quiet foyer. DeAndre was in his home office, staring blankly at the wall, a half-empty glass of bourbon resting on his desk. He looked up as I entered, his eyes searching my face. He could see the absolute shift in my demeanor. I did not look like a woman who was retreating from a legal ambush. I looked like a woman who had just found the kill switch. "Clear the dining room table," I commanded, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of hesitation. "Bring your secure laptop." DeAndre did not ask questions. The raw authority in my tone prompted his immediate compliance. He grabbed his encrypted work laptop and followed me into the formal dining room. I unzipped my leather briefcase and began pulling out the thick stacks of printed documents I had compiled at my secure suite. I spread them across the massive mahogany table, creating a sprawling, undeniable map of his family's financial destruction. I placed the property deeds, the shell company tax filings, and the private equity loan agreements in perfectly organized rows. "Look at this," I said, tapping my manicured finger against the heavily redacted mortgage document. "Your parents are not old money elites protecting a pure bloodline. Your father's investment firm has been a complete ghost ship for nearly a decade. He has been shuffling depreciating commercial assets between dummy limited liability companies just to generate fake paper revenue. And this," I slid the private equity default notice directly in front of him, "is the real reason they filed that emergency court injunction against your trust yesterday." DeAndre leaned over the table, his eyes rapidly scanning the dense legal jargon and the staggering financial figures. I watched his brilliant analytical mind shift gears. The wounded, betrayed son completely vanished. The aggressive top-tier vice president of finance took over. A massive balloon payment. DeAndre murmured, his brow furrowing as he traced the amortization schedule. "They took out a predatory private equity loan against the Buckhead mansion." "Exactly," I confirmed, "and they are 3 months behind. The lender has already issued a formal notice of default. They are weeks away from absolute public foreclosure. They do not think I am a gold digger, DeAndre. They know I make my own money. They filed that psychological manipulation injunction to freeze your accounts because they were desperately planning to bypass your authorization and siphon your liquid trust funds. They needed your cash to save their house from the bank." DeAndre's jaw tightened into a rigid line. He pulled his laptop closer and booted up his secure financial terminal. He started cross-referencing the shell company routing numbers I had highlighted on the tax documents. If his father was running a ghost ship, DeAndre needed to know exactly how Roland had managed to make the minimum interest payments on a multi-million-dollar private equity loan for the past 5 years. There had to be a secondary source of incoming capital. Give me the exact routing numbers for Roland's primary holding accounts. DeAndre ordered, his fingers flying across his keyboard with blistering speed. I read the 12-digit numbers aloud. DeAndre ran them through a deep transactional database tracking the incoming wire transfers that had been keeping his parents' fake empire artificially inflated. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the dining room was the rapid, aggressive clicking of his keyboard. Then DeAndre completely froze. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving behind a stark, horrifying pallor. He stared at his glowing monitor as if he had just seen a ghost. "What is it?" I asked, stepping around the table to look at his screen. "What did you find?" DeAndre's voice dropped to a hoarse, unrecognizable whisper. "This is not possible. This has to be a mistake." He frantically typed another sequence of commands, opening a highly restricted internal ledger from his own investment fund. He placed 2 windows side by side on his screen. On the left was the incoming deposit history for Roland's failing shell company. On the right was the outgoing disbursement ledger for a massive, federally backed subsidiary portfolio that DeAndre personally managed at his firm. The numbers matched perfectly. Every single time Roland faced a severe margin call or a threatening mortgage deadline over the past 2 years, a highly obscured wire transfer was initiated from DeAndre's subsidiary portfolio. The funds were being routed through a complex series of dummy vendor accounts and completely untraceable offshore holding companies, eventually landing directly in Roland's primary operating account. "DeAndre," I said slowly, the terrifying reality of the situation settling over me. "Someone inside your firm is illegally funneling federal investment funds into your father's failing business. Not just someone." DeAndre replied, his voice suddenly vibrating with a lethal, icy rage. "Look at the digital authorization signatures on the outgoing transfers." I leaned closer to the screen. The authorization codes were heavily encrypted, but DeAndre accessed the internal directory to reveal the user identification. The name attached to every single fraudulent wire transfer glowed brightly on the monitor. Darnell, Kendra's husband, the golden son-in-law, the man who had sat at the prestigious family table and smirked with arrogant satisfaction while my 6-year-old son was physically shoved into a dark corner. Darnell worked as a senior compliance contractor for a third-party auditing firm that serviced DeAndre's subsidiary portfolio. It was a position that granted him deep, backdoor access to the institutional accounts. "Darnell has been secretly embezzling money from a portfolio under my direct management." DeAndre stated, the absolute horror of the betrayal radiating from his rigid posture. "He has been systematically siphoning federal funds, laundering them through these dummy vendors, and injecting the stolen cash directly into my father's ghost ship. That is how they have been covering the margin calls. That is how they have been hiding their bankruptcy. And that is how Kendra has been funding her lavish lifestyle," I added, remembering the pathetic, sobbing dashcam audio I had played at the school courtyard that morning. "Kendra begged me for $50,000 because Darnell's credit cards were maxed out." He must have hit a wall. He must have realized that the internal auditors at your firm were getting too close to discovering the missing capital. Darnell could not steal any more money without triggering a massive federal red flag. DeAndre stood up from the table, his chair scraping violently against the floor. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating, lethal clarity. His own family was actively committing egregious federal wire fraud to maintain their arrogant, fake high society image. They were funding their country club memberships, their imported cars, and their designer wardrobes with stolen institutional money. But the absolute darkest part of their scheme was the injunction they had filed yesterday. "They were not just trying to steal your trust funds to save their house," I said, looking at my husband with profound realization. "DeAndre Darnell was embezzling from a portfolio that has your name on it as the managing vice president. If the federal regulators discovered the missing funds, Darnell was perfectly positioned to leave a digital trail pointing straight back to you. They filed that injunction claiming you were psychologically manipulated and mentally unstable. They were laying the legal groundwork to completely frame you for the missing money. They were going to use my supposed manipulation as the excuse for your erratic financial behavior. They were willing to let you take the fall for a federal crime. They were willing to let you go to federal prison just to cover their tracks. DeAndre walked over to the large window overlooking our driveway, staring out into the dark, quiet night. The absolute silence in the dining room felt incredibly heavy. The ultimate betrayal had just been fully exposed. This was not about protecting a pure bloodline. This was not about excluding a stepson from a promotional dinner. This was a ruthless, calculated conspiracy to destroy our lives and strip us of our freedom, to protect a hollow, decaying legacy. When DeAndre finally turned back to face me, the man I loved was gone. In his place stood an executioner. The deep, unconditional loyalty he had always held for his parents had been completely eradicated, burned away by the undeniable proof of their malicious criminality. "There is no family discount on justice," DeAndre said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth, mercy, or hesitation. "They wanted to play a high-stakes corporate game. They wanted to treat me like a liability and treat my son like trash. Fine. I am officially signing off on their total destruction." He walked back to the mahogany dining table and sat down at his computer. His fingers moved with absolute brutal precision. He began compiling a massive, airtight, irrefutable digital dossier. He pulled the IP addresses, the encrypted transaction logs, the dummy vendor contracts, and the exact timestamps of Darnell's unauthorized access. He linked every single stolen dollar directly to Roland's failing shell companies and Vivian's highly leveraged Buckhead estate. I watched my husband build a federal criminal case against his own flesh and blood. He did not shed a single tear. He did not pause to consider the catastrophic social fallout. He was operating with the cold, mechanical efficiency of a man who was protecting his true family from a pack of ravenous, desperate predators. "I am sending this comprehensive fraud dossier directly to my contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation," DeAndre announced, saving the final encrypted folder onto a secure drive. "Darnell is going to face 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. My father will be indicted as a co-conspirator for receiving and laundering stolen institutional funds. Their fake empire is over." He looked up at me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with intense, unwavering solidarity. "I have handled the criminal side of their destruction, Sienna. Now it is your turn. You said you wanted to buy their debt. You said you wanted to dismantle their foundation. Do it. Buy the private equity loan. Take absolute legal ownership of that Buckhead mansion. I want you to hold the deed to Vivian's precious throne." A fierce, predatory thrill surged through my veins. The trap was perfectly set. DeAndre had secured the criminal evidence that would lock Darnell and Roland in federal prison. Now I was going to secure the financial weapon that would leave Vivian and Kendra completely homeless, utterly humiliated, and entirely at my mercy. I picked up my phone and opened my contact list, scrolling straight to the direct line of the private equity lender in New York. The sun was going to rise in a few hours, and when it did, I was going to initiate the most ruthless commercial real estate transaction of my entire career. Vivian thought I was a lower-class outsider. She was about to find out that I was her new landlord. I did not sleep that night. While DeAndre finalized his comprehensive federal fraud dossier against Darnell, I began constructing the legal framework for my own lethal strike. I needed absolute secrecy. If Vivian or Roland caught even a whisper of my involvement, they might attempt to stall the foreclosure with a desperate bankruptcy filing. I needed a ghost entity. By 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I was back inside my private corporate suite drafting the incorporation documents for a brand new, completely blind limited liability company registered in Delaware. I named it Corner Table Holdings. A silent, deeply personal nod to the exact spot where Vivian had tried to banish my son. Through the Delaware registry, my name would never appear on a single public document. I appointed a proxy registered agent and funded the entity directly from my own commercial commission savings account. By 9 o'clock, Corner Table Holdings was a fully capitalized, legally binding corporate entity. It was time to hunt. I pulled up the contact information for Vanguard Sterling Equity, the ruthless New York private equity firm that currently held the massive defaulting balloon mortgage on Vivian's Buckhead mansion. I bypassed the standard customer service lines and used my elite broker credentials to get directly routed to a senior portfolio manager named Marcus. Marcus was exactly the kind of Wall Street predator I dealt with on a weekly basis. He was sharp and patient and cared only about his quarterly profit margins. I did not introduce myself as Sienna, the daughter-in-law of his defaulting client. I introduced myself as the lead acquisition broker for Corner Table Holdings, representing a group of aggressive, cash-rich investors looking to purchase distressed, non-performing luxury assets in the Atlanta market. I have my eyes on a specific non-performing note in your Georgia portfolio, I told Marcus, my voice projecting absolute icy confidence. It is a sprawling residential estate in Buckhead, currently held by Roland. Your firm issued a high-yield loan 5 years ago. The massive balloon payment is now 90 days past due. You have issued a formal notice of default, but you have not initiated the public auction yet. Marcus chuckled, a dry, cynical sound over the line. You have done your homework, but that property is prime real estate. We are confident we will recoup our principal and heavy penalty interest when we force the sale on the courthouse steps next month. The owners are completely tapped out. We are just waiting out the statutory notice period. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. You and I both know that high net worth foreclosures are rarely that clean, Marcus. Roland is a desperate man. If you push him to the courthouse steps, he will file an emergency Chapter 11 bankruptcy injunction the morning of the auction. He will tie your capital up in federal bankruptcy court for 2 years. Your legal department will bleed billable hours fighting his stall tactics, and your investors will demand to know why you are holding toxic, non-performing paper on your books. I let the silence hang for a long, heavy moment, allowing the threat of a messy, prolonged legal battle to fully sink in. Then I offered him the golden parachute. My clients are offering you a completely clean, immediate exit strategy. I continued, my tone shifting to a smooth, transactional rhythm. Corner Table Holdings will purchase the entire debt package from Vanguard Sterling Equity today. We will buy the non-performing note and take the assignment of the mortgage. We are offering a pure cash transaction, no financing contingencies, no appraisal periods. We wire the funds directly into your escrow account by the close of business. You get to clear a massive toxic liability off your quarterly balance sheet instantly, and my firm assumes the absolute burden of dealing with Roland's inevitable bankruptcy tantrums. I could practically hear Marcus sweating over the telephone line. A 12% discount on a multi-million-dollar loan was a substantial haircut for a private equity firm. But retaining a dead asset that was actively sinking their quarterly projections was professional suicide in his cutthroat industry. He put me on a brief hold to consult with his managing director. I sat completely still, my eyes locked on the digital clock on my monitor, my heart beating with the steady, measured rhythm of an apex predator waiting for the kill. 4 minutes later, Marcus returned to the line. We will accept a 10% discount. Marcus countered, his tone tight and defensive. And we transfer the note entirely as is. We wash our hands of Roland completely. There will be no recourse against Vanguard once the wire clears. We have a deal, I stated instantly, securing the agreement without a second of hesitation. Send the assignment of mortgage and the wire transfer instructions to my secure legal portal immediately. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in aggressive high-speed corporate finance. I liquidated a massive portion of my own personal wealth. Every massive commission check I had earned from leasing skyscrapers, every single performance bonus I had stockpiled from outmaneuvering rival brokers over the past 5 years, I transferred it all directly into the escrow account for Corner Table Holdings. DeAndre offered to quietly liquidate some of his clean, non-trust assets to assist with the purchase, but I flatly refused. I wanted this victory to be entirely mine. I wanted Vivian's precious pure bloodline estate to be purchased strictly with the hard-earned money of the woman she had viciously labeled a lower-class outsider. The digital paperwork flooded into my inbox. The assignment of the security deed, the transfer of the promissory note, and the official transfer of the foreclosure rights. My corporate attorneys reviewed every single clause with microscopic precision, ensuring that Roland had absolutely no legal loopholes to escape through. Once they gave the green light, I authorized the massive wire transfer. The digital funds moved from my Atlanta bank to New York in a matter of seconds. At precisely 4:15 in the afternoon, Vanguard Sterling Equity executed the final counter signatures. The electronic confirmation pinged loudly on my workstation. Escrow was officially closed. The transaction was absolute and irreversible. Because the loan was highly distressed and Roland was an active massive liability, the New York lender had eagerly handed over the keys to the kingdom just to escape the blast radius. The paperwork was signed, sealed, and executed with flawless lethal efficiency. I printed out the final, fully executed assignment of the mortgage. I held the heavy, warm paper in my hands, tracing the raised notary seals with my fingertips. This single stack of documents represented the absolute totality of Vivian and Roland's fabricated high society existence. It was the physical manifestation of their arrogance, their staggering debt, and their impending ruin. By purchasing the non-performing note, I had not simply paid off their mortgage. I had legally stepped into the shoes of the bank. I am now legally the sole creditor and owner of my in-laws' home. The sheer magnitude of that reality washed over me, replacing any lingering traces of the morning's anxiety with an armor of absolute untouchable power. I did not just hold their debt, I held their social execution in the palm of my hand. I sat at my desk and drafted the official legally binding notice of acceleration. Because Roland was already 90 days in default with the previous lender, all of his grace periods had entirely expired. As the new note holder, I had the immediate, indisputable right to demand the full immediate payment of the entire multi-million-dollar balance within exactly 30 days. When Roland inevitably failed to produce the cash, the property would legally default directly to me. There would be no public auction on the courthouse steps. There would be no chance for Darnell to steal more federal funds to bail them out. The house was mine. Vivian's throne room belonged to the mother of the boy she threw into the corner. I neatly clipped the notice of acceleration to the heavy stack of the assignment deeds. I placed all the documents into a thick waterproof legal envelope, treating it with the care of a loaded weapon. I walked across my private office, dialed the biometric code into my heavy steel wall safe, and placed the envelope inside. I closed the heavy steel door, spinning the dial to scramble the combination. The loud metallic click echoed through the quiet room, sounding exactly like a prison cell slamming shut. I locked the documents away, and I decided right then that I would not say a single word. I would not call Vivian to gloat over my supreme victory. I would not send Roland a threatening email to watch him squirm. I would simply remain in the shadows and wait. I knew from years of dealing with aggressive real estate tycoons that desperate, arrogant people always tried to strike one final time before they collapsed. They would try to manipulate DeAndre again. They would try to force a public apology to validate their fragile egos. They would set a grand theatrical stage to try and humiliate us one last time to save their dying legacy. And when they did, when they gathered their elite friends and demanded our absolute submission, I would be waiting. I would stand in front of their entire world, reach into my bag, and drop the ultimate guillotine. The agonizing wait lasted exactly 4 days. I knew the silence would absolutely consume Vivian. Narcissists operate on the fundamental assumption that they control the emotional temperature of every single room they enter. By completely cutting off her access, DeAndre and I had plunged her into an intolerable void. She could not yell. She could not manipulate. She could not assert her dominance over our daily lives. We forced her to sit in the terrifying quiet of her crumbling Buckhead estate, drowning in secret debt, while her golden son-in-law continued to embezzle federal funds right under her nose. I spent those 4 days operating my commercial real estate brokerage with a lethal, hyper-focused clarity. Every time I looked at the encrypted drive holding the deed to her mansion, A cold wave of satisfaction washed over me. I owned her entire existence and she was utterly oblivious to the impending destruction. On Thursday evening, DeAndre and I were sitting at our kitchen island. He was reviewing the final highly encrypted pages of the FBI dossier he had compiled against Darnell. I was sipping a glass of Cabernet, finalizing the logistical details of my own corporate ambush. Suddenly, DeAndre's private executive work line began to ring. We had blocked all of his family's personal numbers on our cell phones, but his corporate direct line was routed to his mobile device for emergency financial escalations. He checked the caller identification. It was an unlisted number. He answered with his standard clipped professional greeting. The voice that echoed out of the receiver was immediately recognizable, though heavily laced with theatrical, agonizing sobs. DeAndre put the call on speakerphone and placed the device flat on the granite counter between us. "DeAndre, please do not hang up," Vivian wept, her voice trembling with a meticulously practiced, suffocating fragility. "I had to borrow a friend's phone just to reach you. I am begging you to listen to your mother for just 1 minute." DeAndre did not say a word. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at me. His face was a mask of carved stone. Vivian took his silence as an invitation to launch into an absolute masterclass of emotional manipulation. She sobbed loudly into the receiver, describing her rapidly declining health and her sleepless nights. She painted a vivid, pathetic picture of an elderly woman whose heart was being physically torn apart by her son's cruel abandonment. "Our family is completely falling apart, DeAndre," Vivian cried, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "Your father is entirely stressed out. Kendra is a nervous wreck. We are all just completely shattered by this massive, ugly divide. And I know why this is happening. I know that Sienna is forcing you to shut us out. Her hostility has always been the dark cloud hanging over this family. She has always hated our traditions, and now she is using her aggressive corporate mentality to turn you against the very people who gave you everything. She is isolating you, my sweet boy. She is breaking this family into pieces out of pure lower-class spite." I sat absolutely motionless, listening to her venomous gaslighting. She was currently attempting to steal my husband's trust funds through a fraudulent federal court injunction. She had actively tried to revoke his legal adoption of my 6-year-old son. Yet in her twisted, arrogant mind, I was the hostile aggressor who was destroying the family peace. It was a staggering display of narcissistic delusion. Vivian blew her nose loudly into the receiver, pausing for dramatic effect, before shifting her tone from a weeping victim to a magnanimous, forgiving matriarch. She needed to present her ultimate solution. "You know that the 40th anniversary of our family legacy is approaching?" Vivian continued, her voice steadying into its usual arrogant cadence. "We are hosting the massive Family Legacy Gala at the Country Club this coming Saturday. The entire Atlanta elite will be there. The mayors, the bank presidents, the charity directors. Everyone who matters in this city is attending to honor the enduring strength of our pure bloodline. It is the most important night of the decade for your father and me." DeAndre leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. He knew exactly what was coming. The bait was being laid out. "I want you and Sienna to be there," Vivian announced, sounding as if she were bestowing a royal pardon upon peasants. "I want to heal this terrible rift. Your father and I filed that court injunction because we were terrified for your mental state. We thought you were being brainwashed. But we are willing to view this entire ugly ordeal as a massive misunderstanding. We are willing to extend an olive branch to save your soul." Then came the audacious, toxic demand. "Here is what we propose," Vivian said, her voice dripping with extreme, sickening condescension. "If you and Sienna come to the gala this Saturday, we can fix everything. All you have to do is walk up on that stage stand in front of our esteemed guests and publicly apologize to your father and me. You just need to look the community in the eye and apologize for disrespecting our deep family traditions and causing this unfortunate public scene. If you show absolute humility and publicly recognize your mistakes, we will drop the lawsuit entirely. We will instruct our wealth management lawyers to unfreeze your trust accounts on Monday morning." She paused, saving her most horrific, insulting offering for the very end. She genuinely believed this final concession would bring us entirely to our knees. And DeAndre Vivian whispered, sounding incredibly smug. If you do this, if Sienna publicly humbles herself and proves she can respect her betters, we will formally accept the boy. We will stop the adoption revocation process and allow Trey to officially use our family name. He can be part of the legacy. We will grant him that privilege. I felt a violent, icy shockwave ripple through my entire body. She was actually using my son's legal identity as a bargaining chip to extort a public apology. She wanted to stand on a stage adorned in her fake diamonds and watch me bow my head in front of Atlanta's high society. She wanted me to beg for the right to keep my own child's family intact. She thought she held all the power. She thought the threat of the frozen accounts and the adoption lawsuit had absolutely crushed our spirits. She believed we were desperate, terrified, and willing to trade our dignity for her arrogant mercy. DeAndre kept the phone resting flat on the granite counter. He did not immediately respond. He slowly raised his head and locked his dark, intense eyes onto mine. We shared a cold, calculating look that communicated entirely without words. We both understood the massive, beautiful irony of her demand. Vivian was inviting us to a high-profile, highly populated venue. She was handing us a live microphone. She was giving us an audience filled with every single prominent banker, real estate developer, and socialite in the city. She was building the exact execution stage we needed to drop the guillotine. I gave my husband a slow, deliberate nod. The trap was absolutely perfect. DeAndre leaned over the speakerphone. His voice was incredibly smooth, betraying absolutely zero emotion. He sounded exactly like a defeated man who had finally realized he could not fight the overwhelming power of his superior family. "We hear you," Mother DeAndre said softly. "Oh, thank God." Vivian exhaled sharply, a loud, triumphant sigh of relief echoing through the speaker. "I knew you would finally see reason, my sweet boy. I knew you would realize that you cannot survive without our protection. Just wear your tailored black tuxedo and tell Sienna to wear something muted and respectful. Do not try to draw attention. The night belongs to the family legacy." "We understand completely," DeAndre replied, his voice dropping an octave into a lethal mechanical calm. "We will be there, and we will give the family exactly what it deserves." Vivian let out a delighted, arrogant laugh. She was so blinded by her own narcissism that she completely missed the terrifying double meaning hidden inside his promise. "I will have the valet reserve a premier spot for your car," she boasted. "Do not be late." The line disconnected with a sharp click. The kitchen plunged back into silence. I stared at the dark screen of the mobile phone. Vivian had just smugly hung up the receiver, entirely convinced she had broken us. She believed she had successfully protected Darnell's embezzlement, secured the trust funds to pay off her massive defaulting private equity loan, and forced me into a state of total humiliating submission. She thought Saturday night would be her ultimate crowning achievement. I stood up from the kitchen island, picked up my glass of Cabernet, and took a slow, satisfying sip. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins like rocket fuel. DeAndre closed his laptop. The heavy, encrypted digital dossier containing the absolute, irrefutable proof of Darnell's massive federal wire fraud was completely finished. Every bank routing number, every fake vendor contract, and every single stolen dollar was meticulously mapped out for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I walked down the hallway to my home office and opened the heavy steel wall safe. I reached inside and touched the thick, waterproof legal envelope. Inside rested the assignment of the mortgage, the official transfer of foreclosure rights, and the legally binding notice of acceleration. I was the sole legal owner of the Buckhead mansion. Both sides were now fully armed. Both sides believed they held the ultimate winning hand. Vivian and Roland were preparing to host a lavish, fake celebration of their elite lineage. DeAndre and I were preparing for an absolute massacre. We were going to walk right through the front doors of that country club, take their microphone, and wipe their entire existence off the map. The war was officially on. Saturday morning broke over Atlanta with a deceptive, brilliant clarity. The sky was a flawless, piercing blue, entirely ignorant of the absolute devastation we were about to unleash on the city's high society. I woke up before dawn, my mind already operating at maximum capacity. Beside me, DeAndre was already dressed. He had bypassed his weekend casual wear for a dark, razor-sharp tailored suit. He looked like a man preparing to deliver a fatal blow. He picked up his leather briefcase from the bedroom armchair. Inside sat the comprehensive, meticulously organized embezzlement dossier. Every encrypted log, every fake vendor contract, and every single routing number detailing Darnell's massive federal wire fraud was neatly printed and stored on a secure flash drive. DeAndre kissed my forehead, his eyes dark and resolute. He walked out the door and drove straight to the federal building in downtown Atlanta. He bypassed the standard security checkpoints, using his elite corporate clearance, and met directly with his primary contact in the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He handed over the physical binder and the digital drive, laying out the exact mechanism Darnell had used to siphon federal funds to Roland's ghost ship company. The federal agents reviewed the undeniable paper trail with grim efficiency. By the time DeAndre walked out of the federal building, the wheels of ultimate justice were already in motion. Darnell's arrogant, fraudulent existence was officially on a terrifying, rapidly ticking clock. While DeAndre was securing the federal indictments, I was standing in my massive walk-in closet preparing my own armor. I bypassed the muted, submissive colors Vivian had so arrogantly demanded. I was not going to play the role of the humbled, defeated daughter-in-law. I reached for a breathtaking floor-length emerald green gown, the rich, vibrant fabric draped perfectly over my silhouette. It was the absolute color of money, of dominance, and of pure, undeniable power. I paired it with my sharpest stilettos and applied my makeup with flawless, calculated precision. I locked the heavy legal envelope containing the deed to Vivian's Buckhead mansion securely inside my designer clutch. I walked into the living room and found Trey sitting on the sofa, dressed in a sharp little black suit swinging his legs. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with innocent admiration. I walked over, knelt down so we were perfectly at eye level, and adjusted his small silk tie. I looked into his bright eyes and smiled a warm, fiercely protective smile. "Watch closely today," I told him. My voice steady and filled with absolute conviction. "Mommy is going to show you exactly how we deal with bullies. We do not hide and we do not run. We stand tall and we take away their power." Trey nodded, a confident little smile spreading across his face. DeAndre walked through the front door a moment later, his posture radiating a lethal, untouchable calm. The federal trap was set. The real estate trap was locked in my hands. We walked out to our car, ready to burn their fake kingdom to the ground. We pulled into the sweeping, circular driveway of the exclusive country club right as the sun began to set. The grounds were crawling with valet attendants, rushing to park a massive fleet of imported luxury vehicles. The grand columned entrance was illuminated by warm, dramatic uplighting. We handed our keys to the valet and walked toward the massive double doors of the grand ballroom. The moment we stepped over the threshold, the sheer, suffocating opulence of the event hit me. The room was absolutely packed to maximum capacity, with the absolute elite of Atlanta's high society. Politicians, bank presidents, and prominent charity board directors mingled under towering, dripping crystal chandeliers. Massive ice sculptures adorned the buffet tables, and waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of top-tier champagne. It was a staggering, grotesque display of wealth funded entirely by stolen institutional money and desperate defaulting private equity loans. Through the sea of tailored tuxedos and expensive designer gowns, I spotted Vivian immediately. She was holding court in the direct center of the ballroom, practically glowing with smug, arrogant satisfaction. She was parading around in a massive, glittering diamond necklace and matching chandelier earrings. I knew from my deep dive into their catastrophic financial records that every single stone she was wearing was completely rented. She did not own a fraction of the wealth she was projecting. Vivian waved her hand dismissively at a passing waiter, then loudly projected her voice to ensure the surrounding circle of influential bank presidents heard her every word. She pulled Kendra and Darnell close to her sides, beaming with fake manufactured pride. "Look at these two," Vivian announced, her voice echoing over the smooth string quartet playing in the background. They are the true future of our legacy. Darnell has been managing his financial portfolios with such incredible brilliance, and Kendra is the absolute pillar of high society grace. They represent the pure, untainted bloodline of this family's enduring excellence. Kendra smiled a sickeningly sweet, performative smile, entirely oblivious to the fact that her humiliating, desperate plea for a Hermes bag was permanently burned into the minds of half the PTA mothers in the room. Darnell puffed out his chest, looking completely arrogant, sipping a glass of expensive bourbon. He genuinely believed his complex shell game had successfully outsmarted my husband's auditing firm. He had no idea that federal agents were currently building a raid schedule with his name on it. Vivian turned her head slightly and finally noticed DeAndre and me standing near the grand entrance. Her eyes immediately darted to my emerald gown. Her face flashed with brief irritation at my refusal to wear the muted, submissive colors she had demanded, but it was quickly replaced by a deeply triumphant, venomous smirk. She saw my presence as her ultimate victory. She genuinely believed we had come to surrender to beg for our financial lives and to apologize to her in front of the entire city. As DeAndre, Trey, and I walked slowly and purposefully into the center of the grand ballroom, the atmosphere instantly grew thick with passive-aggressive tension. The malicious, coordinated smear campaign Vivian and Kendra had launched on Monday morning had clearly saturated the room. I could feel the hostile, judging eyes of the elite socialites tracking my every move. They gathered in tight, judgmental clusters, whispering behind manicured hands and crystal champagne flutes. They fully expected me to walk in looking completely defeated, broken by the crushing weight of their collective social rejection and the terrifying threat of a frozen family trust fund. They expected a woman crawling back for mercy. Instead, I glided across the marble floor with the absolute, untouchable posture of a reigning queen. I held my head high, making direct, unflinching eye contact with the women who had attempted to destroy my career just days prior. Their whispers faltered, and they quickly looked away, utterly unnerved by my complete lack of fear. Roland separated himself from a group of local real estate developers and intercepted DeAndre near the massive central ice sculpture. Roland puffed out his chest, desperate to assert his patriarchal dominance and intimidate his son in front of his wealthy peers. He leaned in close, utilizing aggressive, complex corporate business jargon to try and rattle my husband. "You better be ready to fall on your sword tonight," DeAndre Roland muttered, his voice a low, hostile threat, masked by a fake smile for the audience. "The board is watching. The investors are watching. You need to show complete contrition and prove you can stabilize your erratic personal liabilities before you permanently damage the firm's overarching capital strategy." DeAndre did not flinch. He did not break his perfectly composed, rigid stance. He simply looked down at his father, the man who had actively tried to frame him for massive federal wire fraud just to save a heavily mortgaged mansion. DeAndre offered a cold, entirely empty smile that did not reach his eyes. "Enjoy the evening, father," DeAndre replied, his voice dangerously smooth and quiet. "It is going to be an incredibly memorable night for your portfolio." Roland blinked, clearly unsettled by DeAndre's lack of submission, but he masked it quickly and retreated back to Vivian's side. I walked over to the open bar and calmly ordered a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime. I took a slow sip, my fingers lightly brushing against the cool, smooth leather of my clutch. Inside rested the folded, legally binding notice of acceleration and the absolute, irrefutable deed to Vivian's entire existence. The sheer electric anticipation humming through my veins was intoxicating. It was the absolute calm before the catastrophic world-ending storm. I stood silently next to my husband and my son, watching Vivian wave enthusiastically to the crowd, signaling the musicians to lower their volume because the grand anniversary speeches were finally about to begin. The heavy crystal chandeliers above us dimmed in perfect synchronization, casting a warm, dramatic hush over the sprawling ballroom. A single brilliant spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the grand mahogany podium positioned at the far end of the room. The smooth melodies of the string quartet faded into absolute silence. The elite guests turned their attention toward the stage, their champagne flutes pausing mid-air as the main event commenced. Vivian stepped into the spotlight, her rented diamonds catching the harsh light and scattering artificial rainbows across the high ceiling. She glided toward the microphone with the practiced, arrogant elegance of a monarch addressing her loyal subjects. Roland stood slightly behind her, puffing out his chest, completely dependent on his wife to maintain the grand illusion of their supremacy. Down at the front table, Kendra and Darnell positioned themselves to have the best view, their faces glowing with smug anticipation. They were all entirely convinced that this was the moment their absolute dominance would be cemented into Atlanta high society history forever. Vivian tapped the microphone with one perfectly manicured finger. A sharp, clear sound echoed through the massive ballroom. She smiled, looking out over the sea of wealthy politicians, corporate bankers, and prominent socialites. "Good evening, esteemed friends, honored guests, and cherished partners." Vivian began, her voice dripping with extreme, sickening sweetness. "Tonight we gather to celebrate a remarkable milestone, 40 years of our family legacy, 40 years of unparalleled excellence, unwavering tradition, and the absolute purity of our lineage. In a world that constantly tries to dilute greatness with mediocrity, our family has stood as an impenetrable fortress of high society values." She paused, letting her arrogant words wash over the attentive crowd. The wealthy attendees nodded in agreement, murmuring their approval. Vivian's eyes slowly scanned the room until they locked directly onto me. Her fake smile sharpened into a venomous, calculating smirk. "We have always believed that true power comes from protecting our borders." Vivian continued, her gaze burning into my emerald gown. "We know that real wealth and genuine class cannot be bought or married into. It must be inherited. It must be bred. There are always those who try to infiltrate our exclusive circles, desperate outsiders who claw at our gates, hoping to steal a fraction of our prestige. They bring their baggage, their lack of refinement, and their polluted histories, attempting to drag our pristine legacy down into the dirt." The tension in the ballroom spiked violently. Everyone in the room knew exactly who Vivian was talking about. The passive-aggressive whispers flared up again as eyes darted between the stage and where I stood perfectly still next to DeAndre. Vivian was publicly labeling me and my innocent son as toxic impurities, utilizing a microphone and an audience of hundreds to execute her vicious social slaughter. The wealthy attendees whispered behind their hands, thoroughly enjoying the scandalous spectacle. They thrived on this exact kind of aristocratic brutality. To them, I was just a casualty in a game of old money dominance. But a strong legacy does not crumble under the weight of lower-class interference. Vivian projected, her voice rising with theatrical triumph. "We remain steadfast. We demand respect. And we ensure that anyone who disrespects our traditions is forced to learn their rightful place." I did not break eye contact. I did not shift my weight or show a single ounce of discomfort. I simply stared at her, feeling the heavy, waterproof legal envelope pressing securely against the inside of my designer clutch. Let her talk, I thought to myself. Let her build the pedestal as high as humanly possible, because the fall is going to absolutely shatter every bone in her fake empire. Vivian took a deep, theatrical breath, pressing her hand against her chest as if she were overcome by profound maternal emotion. She shifted her posture, softening her harsh glare into a mask of pure manufactured grace. It was time for her to play the magnanimous, forgiving ruler. "However, family is also about forgiveness," Vivian announced, her tone shifting to a sickeningly compassionate cadence. "It is about guiding those who have lost their way and welcoming them back into the fold when they finally realize their grievous errors. Recently, our family experienced a terrible, deeply painful divide. My beloved son DeAndre was led astray. He was blinded by hostile influences and manipulated into turning his back on the very people who gave him everything." DeAndre stood rigidly beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from his tense muscles. The sheer audacity of his mother standing on a stage funded by stolen federal money claiming he was the one who had lost his way was almost too magnificent to interrupt. "But tonight is a night of profound healing," Vivian declared, extending her arms wide toward the audience. Tonight, the natural order of our family is being rightfully restored. DeAndre has realized the severe gravity of his mistakes. He has come to understand that he cannot survive without the protection and guidance of his true bloodline. He and his wife are here tonight to make amends, to publicly apologize to this community, and to beg for our forgiveness. The entire ballroom gasped softly. To demand a public apology in front of the most powerful executives in the city was the ultimate humiliation tactic. Vivian was trying to permanently break DeAndre's professional reputation by branding him a subservient, erratic child in front of his own banking peers. Kendra practically vibrated with excitement at her table. She had spent the entire week attempting to recover from the brutal humiliation I dealt her at the school courtyard. Now she felt completely vindicated. She believed her mother was handing her the ultimate revenge on a silver platter. DeAndre, Sienna, please step up to the stage, Vivian commanded, gesturing toward the polished wooden stairs. Come up here and show our esteemed guests that you are finally ready to respect your betters. The string quartet began to play a soft, dramatic melody. The spotlight widened to include the pathway from our spot on the floor all the way up to the grand podium. The room held its collective breath. Everyone waited to see if the powerful vice president of finance and his top-tier commercial broker wife would actually bow their heads and submit to the matriarch's vicious demands. I looked down at Trey. He was standing safely next to my trusted personal assistant, whom I had brought specifically to keep him out of the immediate blast radius. I gave her a firm nod, instructing her to step back toward the exit doors. Then I slid my hand into DeAndre's. His grip was firm, hot, and ready for war. We did not lower our heads. We did not hesitate. We walked forward with the slow, synchronized, lethal precision of two apex predators cornering their prey. My emerald gown swept across the marble floor. My stilettos clicked sharply, a rhythmic, terrifying countdown echoing through the silent crowd. We climbed the polished wooden stairs, stepping directly into the harsh glare of the spotlight. Vivian's smirk widened into a massive, triumphant grin. She genuinely believed she had won. She believed she was about to witness my absolute destruction. Roland puffed out his chest, stepping forward to flank his wife, ready to accept our groveling apologies. Darnell swirled his bourbon, completely oblivious to the federal agents who were already coordinating their raid protocols across town. We reached the center of the stage. We stood mere inches away from Vivian and Roland. The air crackled with a volatile, highly explosive energy. Vivian held the microphone out toward DeAndre. Her hand was completely steady, her manicured nails catching the spotlight. "Go ahead, my sweet boy, Vivian," whispered her voice, carrying through the amplification system for the entire ballroom to hear. "Tell everyone how sorry you are. Tell them how Sienna forced you to disrespect your family and beg us to let her keep her place in this city." DeAndre looked at the microphone. He looked at his mother's expectant, arrogant face. He did not reach for the microphone. He did not say a single word. He simply took one calculated step backward, yielding the floor entirely to me. Before Vivian could even register his movement, my hand shot forward. I moved with lightning speed, bypassing DeAndre completely. I clamped my fingers firmly around the microphone and smoothly pulled it directly out of Vivian's grasp. Vivian gasped loudly, taking a shocked step back. Her triumphant smile instantly shattered into a look of profound, terrified confusion. She reached out, trying to grab the microphone back, but I pivoted my body, physically blocking her access while maintaining absolute flawless composure. Roland surged forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Sienna, what do you think you are doing?" he hissed aggressively, trying to step between me and the audience. "Give that back to my wife immediately." I ignored him entirely. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice in panic. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive, high-ceilinged ballroom. It was amplified, perfectly steady and razor-sharp. It cut through the thick, suffocating tension like a newly forged broadsword. "Good evening, Atlanta," I announced, my tone projecting absolute terrifying authority. The crowd immediately stopped whispering. Hundreds of elite guests froze in their tracks, their eyes locked completely on me. My mother-in-law just spoke very passionately about the fundamental importance of legacy. She told you that true power comes from protecting your borders. She told you that real wealth and genuine class cannot be bought, and she warned you about outsiders hiding their polluted histories. I took a slow, deliberate step forward on the stage, forcing Vivian and Roland to shrink back toward the shadows. Vivian is absolutely right about one thing, I continued, my voice echoing with icy, lethal precision. A true legacy is built entirely on truth. It is built on verified assets, clean ledgers, and undeniable financial integrity. So since we are all gathered here tonight to celebrate the absolute reality of this family's enduring greatness, I think it is only fair that we take a very close, highly detailed look at the truth. Vivian's face drained of all color. Her eyes darted wildly around the room. She realized in that exact fraction of a second that I was not there to apologize. I was there to execute her. "Sienna, stop this right now," Vivian shrieked, abandoning her microphone entirely and screaming with raw, unfiltered panic. "Security. Get security up here. She's trying to ruin the gala." I did not even glance at her. I kept my eyes locked directly on the wealthy, powerful crowd. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, subtle nod to the audio-visual technician standing in the control booth at the very back of the room. I had paid him $2,000 cash before the event started to ensure my encrypted flash drive bypassed the country club's standard security protocols. The technician caught my signal. He hit a single button on his master console. The massive high-definition projector screens positioned directly behind the stage suddenly roared to life. The trap was officially sprung, and the absolute destruction of their fake empire was about to be broadcast to the entire city. The massive projector screens behind the stage did not display the expected montage of black tie galas and perfectly curated vacation photos. Instead, they illuminated the dark ballroom with stark, glaring, high-resolution images of Roland's absolute financial ruin. The first slide was a colossal, unredacted federal bankruptcy filing. It displayed Roland's signature right next to a multi-million-dollar deficit. The second slide rapidly transitioned to a detailed schematic of his fraudulent shell companies, complete with the massive unpaid tax liens highlighted in bright, unforgiving red ink. But the final slide was the absolute killing blow. It was the formal, legally binding notice of default and impending foreclosure on Vivian's sprawling Buckhead estate. The astronomical balloon payment debt was displayed in massive, undeniable font for every single bank president, politician, and socialite in the room to read. The initial reaction from the crowd was a collective, sharp intake of breath. For 3 agonizing seconds, a heavy, suffocating silence blanketed the elite gathering. Then the murmurs began. The whispers erupted into loud, shocked conversations. Guests pointed at the massive screens, their champagne glasses completely forgotten. The prominent executives in the room, men and women who dealt with high finance daily, instantly recognized the forms. They saw the predatory interest rates. They saw the catastrophic margin calls. The grand, untouchable illusion of Vivian's old money legacy was being utterly vaporized in real time. I kept the microphone firmly in my hand, my voice projecting effortlessly over the rising chaos in the ballroom. "You wanted to talk about protecting the purity of your legacy, Vivian," I announced, ensuring every single syllable was perfectly articulated. "You wanted to warn these esteemed guests about outsiders bringing in their polluted histories and dragging your pristine name into the dirt. But the only pollution here is the staggering, insurmountable debt you have been hiding from this entire city. Your husband's investment firm has not closed a legitimate commercial deal in a decade. He has been shuffling worthless, depreciating assets between dummy corporations just to maintain the fake illusion of cash flow." Vivian stood completely paralyzed, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror as she stared at the foreclosure notice displayed behind her. Her hands trembled violently, the rented diamond bracelets clattering against her wrists. "And this beautiful, exclusive gala you are hosting tonight?" I continued pacing slowly across the front of the stage to address the crowd directly. "It is not funded by generational wealth. It is funded by desperate, high-risk private equity loans. You are staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar balloon payment that you cannot afford. Your massive estate, the very symbol of your arrogant superiority, is facing imminent foreclosure. You did not invite my husband here tonight to heal a family rift. You invited him here to publicly break him, hoping you could manipulate his trust fund to pay off your shadow market lenders before the bank threw your designer luggage out onto the street. The panic finally shattered Vivian's paralysis. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed terribly through the ballroom. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she flailed her arms toward the back of the room. "Turn those screens off right now! She is lying. This is a complete fabrication. She photoshopped those documents because she is a jealous gold-digging fraud." Roland turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his tightly starched collar. His entire corporate identity had just been eviscerated in front of his most important business contacts. He let out a furious guttural roar and lunged forward. He aimed directly for the audio-visual cables running along the side of the stage, desperate to physically rip the cords from the wall and plunge the room into darkness. But he never even made it halfway across the platform. DeAndre stepped directly into his father's path, his posture an impenetrable, immovable wall of solid muscle. Roland slammed into his son, but DeAndre did not yield a single inch. He gripped Roland by the shoulders and shoved him backward with effortless, terrifying strength. Roland stumbled, his expensive dress shoes slipping on the polished wood, and he crashed hard onto his knees. "Do not take another step," DeAndre commanded, his voice a low, thunderous warning that radiated absolute menace. "You do not get to hide in the dark anymore. You are going to stay right here in the light and face exactly what you have done." Down at the front table, the collateral damage was already unfolding. Kendra had buried her face entirely in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The elite PTA mothers she had tried to manipulate just days ago were standing a few tables away, pointing at her and whispering with ruthless, aristocratic cruelty. The fake, glamorous life Kendra had built was completely dissolving around her. Beside her, Darnell looked absolutely terrified. The color had drained from his face, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the ballroom exits. He knew that if the family's financial collapse was this highly detailed, his own dark secrets could not be far behind. DeAndre turned away from his father, who was still kneeling on the floor in shock, and looked directly down at his brother-in-law. The time for exposing the shell companies was over. It was time for the federal execution. DeAndre reached inside the inner pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. He pulled out the thick-bound FBI dossier. He did not pass the microphone back to me. He did not need it. His voice was naturally commanding, honed by years of dominating hostile corporate boardrooms. He walked to the very edge of the stage, looming directly over Darnell's table. "You thought you were a genius, Darnell," DeAndre stated, his voice slicing through the ambient noise of the panicking crowd. "You really thought you could bypass the internal auditors at my firm. You thought you could use your compliance clearance to build a backdoor into my subsidiary portfolios, and no one would ever notice." Darnell bolted upright in his chair tipping backward and crashing to the floor. He raised his hands, shaking his head frantically. "DeAndre, wait!" Darnell stammered, his voice pitching high with sheer panic. "You do not understand. I can explain everything. It was just a temporary loan. I was going to put the capital back. I swear I was going to replace it." DeAndre did not even blink. He raised his arm and threw the heavy FBI dossier directly at Darnell's chest. The thick binder hit him hard, bursting open upon impact. Dozens of highly classified, heavily encrypted bank logs, fake vendor contracts, and unauthorized offshore wire transfer receipts fluttered through the air, raining down over the pristine white tablecloth and scattering across the marble floor. "You do not get to explain federal wire fraud," DeAndre replied, his tone devoid of any mercy. "You embezzled millions of dollars from institutional clients. You systematically siphoned federal funds to cover my father's catastrophic margin calls and to pay for your wife's fake rented lifestyle. You stole from the very portfolio that bears my name, and you plan to let me take the ultimate fall for your massive criminal incompetence. The guest standing near Darnell physically backed away, treating him like a ticking time bomb. Embezzling from a major financial institution was the ultimate sin in this room. The prominent bank presidents, who had been cheering for the family just 10 minutes ago, were now actively pulling out their phones, likely contacting their own legal departments to ensure they had zero exposure to Roland and Darnell's toxic radioactive entities. Vivian scrambled to her feet, her breathing shallow and ragged. She clawed at DeAndre's sleeve, her manicured nails digging desperately into his tuxedo jacket. "DeAndre, you have to stop this!" She pleaded, tears of genuine, horrific terror ruining her perfectly applied makeup. "You are destroying your own blood. We are your family. You have to protect us. You cannot do this to your own sister. You cannot do this to your father." DeAndre looked down at his mother, his expression reflecting absolute unyielding ice. "You stopped being my family the second you pushed my 6-year-old son into a corner like he was garbage," DeAndre answered, pulling his arm out of her frantic grasp. "You stopped being my family the second you filed a fraudulent court injunction to freeze my assets and tried to legally revoke my parental rights. You were completely willing to let me go to federal prison just to protect your arrogant, hollow legacy, so do not talk to me about protection. I am protecting my true family from you." Darnell dropped to his knees on the ballroom floor, frantically gathering the scattered financial documents with trembling hands. His tuxedo was ruined, his breathing hyperventilating. "DeAndre, please," Darnell begged, looking up with tears streaming down his face. "You cannot expose me. The regulators will ruin me. I will lose my license. I will lose everything. You have to give me time to fix the ledgers. You have to give me a chance." "You are completely out of time," Darnell DeAndre stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried absolute finality. "I bypassed the corporate regulators. I drove to the federal building this morning. I handed this exact comprehensive dossier directly to my contacts in the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They already have the encrypted routing numbers. They already have your digital authorization signatures. They have every single piece of evidence they need to secure a conviction." Kendra let out a blood-curdling scream, collapsing onto the floor next to her husband. She gripped the edge of the tablecloth, pulling expensive silverware down around her in a chaotic, humiliating crash. "No," Kendra wailed, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "You cannot send him to prison. We have children, DeAndre. You cannot do this to us. We will be completely ruined. We will have absolutely nothing left. You chose to fund your fake lifestyle with stolen capital," DeAndre replied, staring down at his sister without a single trace of pity. "You made those choices. Now you get to face the absolute consequences of your actions." The entire ballroom was in a state of absolute unprecedented shock. The 40th anniversary gala had transformed into a public execution of the highest order. The fake empire Vivian had spent decades carefully constructing had been entirely dismantled in less than 10 minutes. Their massive debts were exposed. Their criminal embezzlement was confirmed. Their social standing was permanently, irreparably eradicated. But my part in this beautifully orchestrated destruction was not quite finished. I watched Vivian staggering on the stage, her chest heaving as she struggled to comprehend the sheer magnitude of her complete downfall. She looked broken, terrified, and utterly defeated. She had nothing left to use as a weapon. Her influence was gone. Her son had abandoned her. Her golden son-in-law was headed to federal prison. But I knew that true narcissists never truly surrender until you take away their most prized possession. I knew that until I ripped her physical throne away from her, she would still try to cling to her delusional superiority. I reached inside my designer clutch, my fingers wrapping firmly around the thick, waterproof legal envelope. I stepped forward, positioning myself directly under the brilliant, glaring spotlight. I was about to deliver the ultimate fatal strike, and I was going to make sure every single person in that ballroom witnessed the absolute end of Vivian's reign. I stood perfectly still under the blinding spotlight. Behind me, the massive high-definition screens did not stop their merciless assault. The audio-visual technician in the back booth, loyal to the $2,000 cash I had handed him earlier that evening, initiated the second sequence of my digital presentation. The slides shifted from the initial foreclosure notice to a rapid, undeniable cascade of Roland's darkest financial secrets. High-resolution images of shell company tax returns flashed across the sprawling wall. The projected documents showed absolute zero revenue, massive unfunded liabilities, and desperate predatory loans taken out at catastrophic double-digit interest rates. I watched the faces of the elite Atlanta Society members morph from mere shock to profound professional disgust. These were not easily manipulated people. These attendees were ruthless bank presidents, aggressive hedge fund managers, and highly analytical venture capitalists. They knew exactly how to read a distressed commercial balance sheet. They could instantly see the blatant, clumsy corporate fraud printed in stark black and white. The passive-aggressive whispers that had previously buzzed through the elegant ballroom now erupted into loud, unrestrained murmurs of absolute outrage. A prominent commercial real estate developer in the front row pointed directly at a projected legal document displaying a heavily leveraged margin call. He scoffed loudly, shaking his head in absolute unapologetic disbelief. The grand, untouchable illusion of Vivian's pure bloodline wealth was actively disintegrating in front of the very people she had spent 40 grueling years trying to impress. The wealthy country club elite were suddenly realizing that the expensive vintage champagne they were currently drinking, the extravagant imported caviar they were eating, and the massive crystal chandeliers hanging directly above their heads were all funded by a precarious, rapidly collapsing house of cards. I kept my hand firmly inside my designer emerald clutch, my fingers resting gently against the thick, waterproof legal envelope containing the absolute deed to their beloved home. I let the relentless visual evidence do all the heavy lifting. The massive screens transitioned again this time, projecting a colossal, highlighted federal bankruptcy petition that Roland had secretly prepared months ago, but severely lacked the liquid funds to officially file with the state. The bright red ink on the massive projection cut through the elegant darkness of the ballroom like a terrifying beacon of absolute financial ruin. The harsh reality of the supposedly wealthy, untouchable family was completely exposed, stripped of every single fake diamond and heavily rented luxury vehicle. The overwhelming, undeniable truth was actively burning their meticulously fabricated empire down to ashes. Vivian's highly prized elite guests were actively and physically backing away from the grand stage, instinctively distancing their own pristine reputations from the toxic, highly radioactive fallout of a massive corporate scandal. No one in that room wanted their prestigious names associated with a family drowning in secret, humiliating debt. I stood there observing the utter destruction of their social standing with cold, calculating satisfaction. For years, Vivian had used this exact same ballroom to look down on me, to subtly remind everyone that I was a lower-class outsider who did not belong in their opulent world. She had leveraged her fake inflated net worth to wield absolute power over my husband, demanding his unwavering loyalty while secretly despising the family he had chosen to build with me. Tonight, the tables were irrevocably turned. The glaring projector lights cast long, harsh shadows across the stage, illuminating the sheer desperation etched into my in-laws' faces. Every single meticulously crafted lie they had ever told was currently being broadcast in 10-foot-tall letters. I watched a prominent charity board director, a woman Vivian had desperately courted for years, to secure a seat on an exclusive foundation, pull out her mobile phone. She began aggressively texting, undoubtedly spreading the scandalous news of Roland's catastrophic failure to the rest of the Atlanta elite, who could not attend the gala. The social execution was absolute, swift, and completely merciless. The undeniable visual proof flashing across the massive screens pushed Roland past the absolute brink of rational thought. The terrifying reality of his public exposure shattered his arrogant facade. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of deep purple, the veins in his neck bulging aggressively against his tightly starched tuxedo collar. He scrambled up from his knees, his expensive jacket rumpled and stained. He let out a feral, desperate roar and lunged frantically toward the side of the stage, aiming his heavy body directly at the thick audio-visual cables running along the wooden baseboards. He was determined to physically rip the heavy cords from the wall to plunge the entire ballroom into immediate darkness. Vivian was hyperventilating, clutching her throat as she watched her husband completely unravel. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, demanding the club manager cut the power immediately. "Turn those screens off right this second!" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated hysteria. She pointed a trembling, aggressively manicured finger directly at me. "She is fabricating all of these documents. My daughter-in-law is a manipulative, jealous fraud trying to ruin our flawless family legacy. Do not look at those screens." But her desperate, frantic shrieks only drew more intense attention to the overwhelming financial evidence projected directly behind her. Down at the front VIP table, Kendra had completely collapsed in her chair. She pulled her expensive imported silk shawl completely over her head, desperately trying to hide her face as her elite society friends and the prominent school mothers pointed and stared. The wealthy women who had formerly praised Kendra's impeccable old money grace were now looking at her with ruthless aristocratic contempt. The entire social hierarchy of the room had violently inverted in a matter of minutes, and Kendra was entirely trapped at the absolute, humiliating bottom. She sobbed loudly, her perfectly applied makeup running down her face in dark, messy streaks. Her husband's massive credit card debts and her own pathetic begging voice from the school courtyard dashcam audio were still fresh in the minds of everyone standing nearby. She had no allies left in this room. The wealthy elite abandoned sinking ships faster than anyone else, and Kendra was currently drowning in the wreckage of her own deceitful arrogance. She curled into a tight ball, utterly destroyed. Roland violently clawed at the thick black cables near the edge of the stage, but DeAndre moved with lethal, terrifying speed. He stepped forward, intercepting his father with a rigid, uncompromising stance. DeAndre shoved Roland's hand forcefully away from the main power source, physically forcing the older man back into the harsh, glaring center of the spotlight. DeAndre then turned his cold, predatory gaze down to Darnell, who was still kneeling helplessly on the ballroom floor, frantically trying to gather the scattered, highly classified federal documents. DeAndre reached down, grabbed a thick handful of the encrypted bank logs, and threw them directly at Darnell's chest. The heavy papers slapped violently against Darnell's pristine white dress shirt and fluttered to the floor like toxic snow. "That is the massive, undeniable wire fraud you committed to steal from my institutional clients," DeAndre declared, his voice amplified and vibrating with absolute, uncompromising justice. "You systematically siphoned protected federal capital to pay for her fake rented diamonds and to illegally cover his failing margin calls. Read the transaction timestamps fast, Darnell. You are completely running out of time." Darnell stared at the damning documents, his chest heaving with terrified, jagged breaths. The horrifying realization that his complex, highly illegal embezzlement scheme had been entirely unraveled by his own brother-in-law completely paralyzed him. He looked up at DeAndre, hot tears of genuine, overwhelming panic streaming down his face. "You gave the entire dossier to the federal authorities." Darnell whimpered, his voice barely audible over the loud, chaotic murmurs of the stunned, wealthy crowd. DeAndre did not offer a single ounce of familial mercy. "I handed them the absolute, indisputable proof of your criminal existence," DeAndre confirmed, his dark eyes locking onto Darnell's terrified face. "The white-collar crime division is already processing the federal warrants. Your arrogant, fraudulent lifestyle is completely over. You arrogantly tried to build a secret backdoor into my financial portfolios, and you actively tried to frame my innocent wife for your desperate financial collapse. Now you get to face the full, unmitigated wrath of the federal government." The inescapable, crushing reality of imminent federal prison crashed down heavily on Darnell. He dropped the scattered papers from his trembling hands, burying his face in his palms as he began to weep loudly. The grand, highly anticipated anniversary gala had officially transformed into a brutal, highly public crime scene investigation. The entire elite society of Atlanta was actively standing in that opulent ballroom, watching their meticulously fabricated toxic kingdom permanently burn to the absolute ground. Vivian could no longer maintain even a shred of her aristocratic composure. The sheer, unadulterated reality of her complete financial and social annihilation finally crashed down upon her, shattering her fragile mind. She began hyperventilating, her chest heaving violently under her rented diamond necklace. The sparkling stones clattered loudly against her collarbone as she desperately gasped for air. Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, locked onto me with a level of hatred so pure it practically burned through the cold atmosphere of the ballroom. She lunged forward, her expensive high heels slipping slightly on the polished marble stage, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of elite high society grace. "You absolute trash!" Vivian screamed, her voice tearing out of her throat and echoing harshly across the cavernous room. "You ruined us! You orchestrated this entire vicious smear campaign to destroy my family. We will strip you of everything you own. We will sue you for every single penny you have ever earned. We will take your real estate license and we will kick you and your fatherless child out on the street to rot." The elite audience gasped collectively at the sheer venom of her outburst, but I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Instead, I closed the physical distance between us, stepping directly into Vivian's personal space. I moved with the slow, deliberate, unyielding confidence of an absolute conqueror. I raised the microphone, holding it perfectly steady near my lips, ensuring that the high-fidelity audio system would capture every single cold, lethal syllable I was about to deliver. The entire ballroom held its breath, the silence so profound that you could hear the subtle rustling of silk gowns and the nervous shifting of leather shoes. "You are in no position to kick anyone out on the street, Vivian," I stated, my voice ringing with a smooth, terrifying authority that paralyzed everyone in the room. "You have absolutely zero leverage, zero capital, and zero power left in this city. You wanted to play the ruthless monarch, but you failed to realize that your entire kingdom was heavily mortgaged to the shadow market. To save your husband's failing company and fund your fake lavish country club lifestyle, your private equity lender auctioned off the massive defaulting debt on your precious estate. They wanted out of the toxic blast radius." I paused, letting the crushing reality of my words hang heavily in the perfectly chilled air of the ballroom. "So they sold your debt at a massive, desperate discount. And my firm bought it." Vivian froze completely. Her mouth hung open in a silent, horrified gasp, her panicked eyes darting wildly as her brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic magnitude of my revelation. Roland, who was still kneeling helplessly on the stage behind her, let out a strangled, pathetic wheeze. The high-powered bank presidents and wealthy politicians standing in the audience stared at me in absolute terrified awe. I had not just exposed their financial ruin, I had actively weaponized it against them. I smoothly reached into my tailored emerald clutch, my fingers wrapping around the thick, heavy legal envelope I had secured earlier that morning. I pulled it out, moving with deliberate, excruciatingly slow precision. I unsealed the top and retrieved the pristine, legally binding documents. The crisp, heavy bond paper crinkled loudly against the microphone. I held up the official assignment of the mortgage, the irrevocable transfer of foreclosure rights, and the absolute notice of acceleration, ensuring the prominent red notary seals caught the glaring stage lights. "I am the sole, absolute legal owner of the house you currently live in," I announced, my voice carrying the absolute weight of a finalized execution order. "My Ghost Corporation purchased your massive defaulted balloon mortgage directly from Vanguard Sterling Equity this morning. Every single brick, every imported marble floor, and every perfectly manicured rose garden you used to look down on people now belongs entirely to me. I hold the immediate right of foreclosure, and your grace periods expired months ago." I lowered the microphone slightly, locking my eyes directly onto Vivian's terrified, crumbling face. I dropped the heavy stack of legal documents directly at her feet. The papers hit the polished wood of the stage with a sharp, definitive slap. "You stood in a restaurant surrounded by your elite peers and arrogantly declared that my innocent 6-year-old son did not have the right or the proper bloodline to sit at your prestigious family table," I said, my voice hardening into impenetrable steel. You tried to banish my child to a dark corner because you thought you held all the power. Well, let me tell you exactly what power looks like. You have exactly 30 days to pack your rented clothes, gather your fake diamonds, and get out of my house. The sheer absolute finality of my eviction notice struck Vivian like a physical blow to the chest. The terrifying realization that she was officially homeless, utterly bankrupt, and completely subjected to the mercy of the woman she had viciously abused completely broke her fragile reality. She let out a dramatic theatrical wail, throwing her hand over her forehead in a desperate, entirely fabricated display of aristocratic fragility. She staggered backward and collapsed onto the stage in a massive, performative swoon, fully expecting the wealthy attendees to rush forward to her aid. Not a single person moved. The elite socialites, the powerful politicians, and the prominent PTA mothers simply stood in place, staring at her crumpled form with total, unforgiving apathy. In their cutthroat world, a toxic, bankrupt fraud was the absolute worst kind of liability, and no one was willing to risk their own pristine reputation to comfort a fallen, manipulative matriarch. Vivian lay on the polished wood, completely ignored by the society she had sacrificed her own son to impress. Suddenly, the heavy, ornate wooden doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom swung open with a loud, authoritative crash. The crisp, synchronized sound of heavy, tactical boots, marching in perfect unison, echoed across the marble floors. 4 federal agents wearing sharp, dark suits and prominent Federal Bureau of Investigation badges strode purposefully into the lavish room. They moved with absolute terrifying efficiency, completely ignoring the sea of stunned wealthy guests, parting frantically to clear a wide path for them. The lead agent marched directly up the stairs of the stage, bypassing Roland's trembling form and Vivian's fake swoon entirely. He walked straight to the front table, where Darnell was still kneeling on the floor, desperately trying to hide behind the fallen tablecloth. The agent grabbed Darnell roughly by the shoulder of his ruined tuxedo and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Darnell sobbed hysterically as the cold, heavy steel handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists, the sharp metallic clicks broadcasting his total ruin to the entire room. Kendra let out a raw, agonizing scream. Her entire fake, lavish universe had just been violently ripped away. She scrambled across the floor, her expensive gown tearing on the scattered silverware, and threw herself directly at DeAndre's feet. She clung desperately to his tailored trousers, tears of sheer panic flooding her face. "DeAndre, please!" Kendra wailed, her voice cracking with pathetic, unadulterated desperation. "You have to help us. You have to give me a loan to afford his federal bail. The lawyers will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We will lose the children. We will have absolutely nothing. You cannot let your own brother-in-law go to federal prison. Please, you have to save your family." DeAndre looked down at his sobbing sister. His face was a mask of cold, unbreakable stone. The man who had once been the fiercely loyal protector of this family was completely gone permanently, replaced by a man who had discovered the absolute depth of their treacherous malice. He gently but firmly pried Kendra's desperate hands off his trousers, stepping back to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. "My money is for my real family," DeAndre stated, his voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising finality. "And you are not it." He turned away from the wreckage of his former life. He reached out and took my hand, intertwining his fingers tightly with mine. From the back of the room, my trusted personal assistant walked forward gently, leading Trey by the hand. My brave, brilliant 6-year-old boy looked up at us, his eyes shining with complete trust and innocent pride. DeAndre effortlessly scooped Trey up into his strong arms, holding him close to his chest, securing the absolute center of our true, unshakable universe. We did not look back at Vivian crying on the stage. We did not look back at Roland trembling in absolute defeat. We did not look back at Darnell being physically dragged out of the ballroom by federal agents, nor did we look back at Kendra sobbing hysterically on the marble floor. We walked together down the main aisle of the grand ballroom, our heads held incredibly high, our posture radiating pure, undeniable victory. The wealthy elite crowd remained absolutely silent, parting respectfully to clear our path toward the grand exit. We walked out of the heavy double doors and stepped into the cool, clear Atlanta night. leaving the absolute smoldering ruins of their toxic fake legacy permanently behind us. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The universe has a beautiful, uncompromising way of balancing the scales when you force the truth into the blinding light. The karma delivered to my in-laws was absolute, swift, and documented without a single ounce of pity. 30 days after the anniversary gala, the legal eviction notice I dropped at Vivian's feet reached its unavoidable hard deadline. I did not send a corporate proxy to oversee the repossession of my property. I hired a private armed security firm and stood on the pristine front lawn of the Buckhead estate, watching impassively as professional movers hauled Vivian and Roland's remaining belongings out the front doors and onto the driveway. There were no rented diamonds that day. Vivian wore oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen red eyes, desperately attempting to maintain a pathetic shred of her aristocratic dignity as she watched her entire empire get boxed up into a budget commercial moving truck. Roland looked completely defeated, a hollow, silent shell of the arrogant patriarch who had tried to intimidate my husband just weeks prior. They were formally evicted and completely exiled from the only elite world they cared about. Today, Vivian and Roland live in a cramped, outdated two-bedroom apartment on the far industrial outskirts of Atlanta. The imported Italian marble floors and sprawling rose gardens they once bragged about have been permanently replaced by cheap peeling linoleum and a bleak view of a busy commercial highway. They have been entirely excommunicated from Atlanta's high society. The elite charity boards revoked Vivian's memberships instantly, and the prestigious country club formally banned them from the premises to avoid the radioactive, humiliating fallout of their financial scandal. When you build your entire identity on fabricated wealth and aggressively exclude people based on status, you quickly discover that your so-called elite friends will drop you the exact second your bank accounts run dry. Darnell is currently sitting in a federal holding facility completely denied bail due to the sheer magnitude and severity of his financial crimes. He is eagerly awaiting his official federal sentencing. The comprehensive, encrypted dossier DeAndre handed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation was so incredibly detailed and irrefutable that Darnell's high-priced defense attorneys immediately pushed for a desperate plea deal to avoid spending decades in a maximum security prison. His arrogant, superior smirk is permanently gone, replaced entirely by the crushing, inescapable reality of a ruined life. And Kendra, the golden daughter who had viciously mocked my son and pathetically begged me for money to buy a designer handbag, is now facing the brutal daily consequences of her complicity. With her husband's accounts entirely seized by the federal government and her parents completely bankrupt, Kendra was forced to enter the workforce for the first absolute time in her pampered life. She now works a miserable, exhausting retail job at a mid-tier department store in a local suburban mall. Every single paycheck she earns is heavily garnished by the federal courts to pay mandatory, massive restitution for the institutional funds Darnell embezzled. Her former elite PTA friends completely ignore her if they happen to walk past her register. The woman who tried to destroy my 6-year-old son's social standing is now spending 8 hours a day ringing up clearance items just to afford her basic groceries. The financial slaughter we orchestrated was precise, flawless, and entirely justified. Once the toxic rot was permanently excised from our lives, DeAndre and I focused entirely on rebuilding and rapidly expanding our own empire. I did not keep the Buckhead mansion. I had absolutely no desire to live inside the tainted walls of Vivian's fake, crumbling kingdom. Instead, I used my commercial real estate expertise to completely gut the property, aggressively remodel the outdated interior, and flip it to an international tech developer for a massive, unprecedented profit. I took every single dime of that lucrative multi-million-dollar sale, completely bypassed any standard savings accounts, and rolled the money directly into an ironclad, heavily protected trust fund. That specific trust fund bears only one name: Trey. The very boy Vivian arrogantly declared unfit to sit at her prestigious table is now the sole undisputed financial heir to the liquidated value of her entire lifelong legacy. DeAndre's career trajectory absolutely skyrocketed once he was free from the heavy, suffocating anchor of his family's secret toxic debt. The board of directors at his investment fund, highly impressed by the ruthless, highly analytical way he handled the internal embezzlement crisis and protected his institutional clients, officially promoted him. DeAndre is no longer just a vice president. He is now the chief executive officer of the entire financial firm. He commands his corporate empire with absolute integrity and untouchable power, completely unburdened by the malicious demands of parents who only viewed him as a disposable financial lifeline. Our new normal is incredibly beautiful because it is entirely real. We are currently sitting on the cool aluminum bleachers of a sunny, vibrant community park on a perfect Saturday afternoon. The crisp air smells like fresh-cut grass and warm popcorn. DeAndre is wearing a casual baseball cap and a comfortable cotton shirt, completely relaxed and genuinely smiling. He has his strong arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders as we watch the local Little League Championship baseball game. Down on the dusty dirt field, Trey steps up to home plate. He grips the aluminum baseball bat with fierce, unwavering determination, his little brow furrowed in deep concentration. The opposing pitcher winds up and throws the ball fast over the plate. Trey swings with all his might, and the loud, satisfying crack of metal hitting leather echoes loudly across the entire park. The baseball sails high over the outfielders' heads, flying straight into the deep green grass. DeAndre jumps to his feet immediately, cheering louder than anyone else in the crowded stands, clapping his hands and shouting our son's name with absolute, unfiltered paternal pride. Trey rounds the bases fast, his face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy, and he stomps directly onto home plate for a spectacular game-winning home run. There are no toxic, passive-aggressive family dinners in our lives anymore. There are no forced, wobbly folding tables hidden in the shadows near the kitchen doors. There is only the warm, unshakable reality of a family that genuinely supports, fiercely protects, and openly celebrates one another. We permanently removed the poison and our lives flourished magnificently in the healthy, strong soil we cultivated together. Looking back on the absolute chaos, the devastating betrayals, and the calculated financial war we ruthlessly waged against my in-laws, I have reached a profound state of absolute clarity. High society constantly conditions us to believe that blood relations demand our infinite patience and our unconditional forgiveness. People genuinely think that the title of mother, father, or sister gives them a permanent, irrevocable right to abuse you, to belittle your achievements, and to demand your resources while treating you like a disposable second-class citizen. They rely entirely on your sense of inherent guilt to maintain their toxic control. But that is the greatest, most destructive lie ever told. Family is not a default title you are simply born with, nor is it a guaranteed right you automatically acquire through marriage or legal adoption. Family is an active daily action. It is a deliberate choice. True family is built firmly on a solid foundation of mutual respect, fierce protection, and absolute unconditional love. If the people who share your DNA or your last name use that connection to manipulate your finances, attack your character, or isolate your innocent children, they are not your family. They are simply dangerous predators wearing a highly familiar mask. Vivian and Roland blindly believed their aristocratic status, and their old money illusions made them completely untouchable. They believed that because I was a working-class woman who built my own wealth from nothing, I would eventually bow to their deeply ingrained arrogance. They looked at my beautiful, innocent son and saw nothing but a convenient target for their cruel, elitist insecurities. When they pushed my son into a dark corner and tried to banish him from their sight, they thought they were asserting their supreme social dominance. They did not realize they were handing me the exact heavy hammer I needed to absolutely shatter their fragile glass kingdom into a million irreparable pieces. I do not regret a single action DeAndre and I took. We did not destroy them out of blind emotional vengeance. We executed a precise, highly calculated strategy of absolute self-defense. We protected our peace, we protected our hard-earned assets, and most importantly, we completely protected our child from growing up in the dark, suffocating shadow of their toxic conditional love. Taking away their power was the most profoundly healing action of my entire life. We reclaimed our narrative, secured our future, and ensured that absolutely no one will ever disrespect our family unit again. Do not ever apologize for setting ironclad boundaries. Do not ever feel guilty for permanently removing toxic people from your life, no matter who they are or what social titles they hold. You have an absolute, undeniable right to protect your peace, your hard-earned success, and the people you love. Sometimes, the only way to cure a deeply infected wound is to completely amputate the source of the rot and never look back. Have you ever had to legally or financially destroy a toxic family member to protect your absolute peace? Have you ever faced a critical moment where you had to strip away a master manipulator's power to save yourself or your children? Tell me exactly how you took your power back in the comments below.